All right, we'll go ahead and come to order. Thank you everyone for being here. Today is the 22nd of August. This is the monthly meeting of the Oldham County Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Greg King, and if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone, and if you would please also join me in silencing those electronic devices for the duration of the hearing. First order of business will be approval of minutes. Can I go ahead and get a motion on the floor? Mr. Halfling, second from Ms. Nasser. Thank you. Any edits, corrections? Being none, we will move into voice vote for approval. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. One abstention. One abstention. Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Motion carries. All right. First order of business today will be docket PZ 23-017. Ms. Edgar, will you please read the docket?
Docket PZ 23-017, an application has been filed by Mark and Luke Banta for the approval of a preliminary subdivision plan and waiver for a 36 single-family lot subdivision on approximately 51.64 acres to be known as Locust Estates. The property is located at 6917 West Highway 146, Pee Wee Valley. The zoning is R2 Residential District.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And Mr. Fogel, before we begin, I want to go ahead and get staff sworn. Ms. Edgar?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Fogel?
All right. Good morning. Brian Fogel, Assistant Director, Oldham County Planning Development Services. Ms. Edgar read into the record what we're here to have a public hearing for today, which is a major subdivision with a preliminary plan review and then also a request for a waiver in a right-of-way width. The property is located at 6917 West Highway 146, Pee Wee Valley. Notification of today's public hearing was provided on the county's website on July 31st. Adjoining property owners were mailed notices on August 1st, and a public notice appeared in the Oldham Area newspaper on August 3rd. The location of the property is on the eastern edge of Pee Wee Valley and is located where it's highlighted in red. It's a number of different parcels. Primary access, and we'll get into these details further on into the staff presentation, is off Highway 22 on an approximate 50-foot wide strip immediately to the east of the Church of Latter-day Saints meeting house. So the entrance is right here. It encompasses this property. There is an existing house on the property. There's a private residential railroad crossing for residents here off 146, hence that's why the address on the property is 6917 West Highway 146. And then the zoning in the area is primarily residential, either R1A or R2. There is a little bit of commercial on the opposite side of Highway 22 here, and some multifamily, just reflecting the fact that there's some apartments in the area, and then also personal services like accounting and barbershops. Not a lot of review history with this property before the Planning Commission, because primarily it's been used as a single-family residence. There was one significant case in August of 2021 where a conditional use request was made for a private event venue before the Pee Wee Valley Board of Adjustments, and that request was denied, so an event venue was not established there. And then any of the other review history is related to the public hearing that we're having here today. That the applicants had a neighborhood meeting on May 9th. that the preliminary plan appeared before the Technical Review Committee on June 21st with comments. So the request is for a major subdivision on approximately 51 acres, consisting of 36 single-family lots, and then a waiver in a public street right-of-way, because our subdivision regulations require a 50-foot waiver. But through doing their surveying, they realized that they have a strip of land that's 49.84 feet instead of 50. So there's the technicality of having to ask for a waiver in the public right-of-way width. Oh, I'm going backwards. No, I'm not. All right, here's the preliminary plan. The outside boundary is highlighted in yellow, so it corresponds to the red that you saw on the aerial photograph. And then just a couple points of interest, and then we'll get into those in more detail. The entrance off of Highway 22 is proposed to be right here. You'll notice down here they have their waiver requests listed in the right-of-way width. And then over here is the private residential entrance across the CSX Railroad presently. So as I mentioned earlier, the property's address is off Highway 146 across that railroad track, but the entrance to this subdivision is proposed on Highway 22. So the private residential crossing is right here, coming off of Highway 146 across the railroad track. And the applicants have indicated on their preliminary plan that the lots in the proposed subdivision are not proposed to have access to this private drive, requiring them to go across the railroad track, that the private drive would remain basically a private driveway for a couple of the parcels that are not a part of this subdivision request. And then they're proposing their entrance off Highway 22 right here, again, immediately east of the Church of Latter-day Saints Meeting House. And they have a note here that they will be getting an encroachment permit from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet because it is a proposed entrance on a state highway. And then a couple pictures. So this is a picture of the private rail crossing that would not be used for access for any of the subdivision lots. And then this is a picture of the actual entrance off Highway 22, and I'm going to show you about 3 or 4 pictures here. But basically, the entrance is approximately from here over to here. When you go out there, you can see the survey sticks where they've cleared some brush to do some of their surveying. And then this is looking towards Crestwood, so looking east on Highway 22. Entrance is over here. And just a different perspective, basically, of the same looking direction eastward towards Crestwood. And then this is looking to the west to Pewee Valley. The church's meeting house is located right here. And then just a different perspective. Again, the entrance to the subdivision is proposed to be right here, and you can see where they've started to clear some of the brush to get in there and do their surveying work. One other note on this is that there is a single-family house located on the property. It's known as the Locust, so it's a historic home. They're proposing that historic home would be incorporated into the subdivision and be located on Lot 10, and that there would be 2 outbuildings or accessory structures related to that historic home that would also be located on Lot 10, and those are highlighted right here. So the Locust house is right here, and then there's 2 outbuildings here that they're proposing to remain to be located on the proposed Lot 10 of the subdivision at the end of this cul-de-sac. There are a couple other accessory structures like a pool and a barn located on the property that they're proposing to remove and demolish to support basically the layout of the streets, the layout of the lot lines, and the establishment of the subdivision. And this is just a faraway shot of the house right here. This is the historic house, the locus that would remain, and it would be located on Lot 10 of the proposed subdivision. So in terms of the waiver, their public street entrance is off Highway 22, and it's identified on your preliminary plan as Road A. The strip of property that they own is pre-existing, and when they got out there and did their surveying work, it's not 50.00 feet wide, it's 49.84 feet wide. So that triggers the technicality or the formality that they have to ask you all for a waiver in the public street right-of-way width. And that strip of property that's approximately 50 feet wide is located right here and highlighted in yellow, which will be the entrance to the subdivision, and then the road loops around to provide access to the whole subdivision. On this cross-section for their street, they're showing that they have a 50-foot wide right-of-way throughout the subdivision with curb and gutter roads and then sidewalks on both sides of the street. You guys are familiar, but I'm still going to put this out here. You all are authorized under the subdivision regulations to grant waivers from the requirements of the subdivision regulations when you determine that it will not be a detriment to the public good, that it won't run afoul or impair the purposes of the subdivision regulations, and that it would also won't impair the desirability in the neighborhood and the community. The applicant has provided a written justification for the waiver that was included as Addendum 1 in your staff report. All right, the Technical Review Committee met on this on July 21st. There were lots of comments, most of which the applicant has addressed prior to today's meeting, and my suspicion is that when they get up to give their presentation, they'll address the couple of things that might be outstanding. All of the written technical comments from the Technical Review Committee were included in the staff report and are referenced as Addendums 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I'm going to cover two of them, one of which got addressed yesterday, and that is the school capacity standards. So until yesterday afternoon, we didn't have a number from the Board of Education in terms of the phasing of the number of building permits for the subdivision. That was hand-delivered yesterday, and I will show that to you here shortly. Michael is here. Oh, excellent. And then also Michael could speak to that better than I can. So I'll just show you that. If Michael would like to get up and explain that, that would be awesome. And then the traffic assessment, which I'm going to defer to Jim Silliman, the county engineer, and the applicant. So here is a copy of the school capacity determination that was provided by Michael yesterday. And it's showing that they would be phased to allow 15 building permits per year. So in summary, in terms of the planning and development presentation, I mean, they're asking for the preliminary plan approval to create the 36-lot subdivision with a waiver request on the 50-foot wide strip for the public right-of-way, which would be 49.84 as they have proposed it in their waiver. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Jim Silliman's going to have comments, so I will defer to him, but also answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Fogel. Mr. Silliman, you're up next.
Good morning, Jim Silliman, County Engineer, 100 West Jefferson Street. Let's see. All right, so I've got a comment on the bottom of this page. It says these review comments supplement the City of Pewee Valley engineering review. Just to, for clarification, the City of Pewee Valley is under a permit with the Kentucky Division of Water as their own separate municipal separate storm sewer system. We call it the MS4. So they would not, the applicant won't be getting a stormwater quality management and erosion control permit from Oldham County Engineering Office, but they will be getting that from the city themselves. However, we do work closely with the city, and therefore we're providing review comments to supplement anything that they might observe. One of the comments that was made at TRC, and Brian mentioned that the applicant had addressed many of the comments. That's true. Some of them, though, don't get addressed because they can't get addressed until construction plan review. It's a later stage in development. The comments were regarding blue line streams that are mapped on the online viewer with USGS. This is something that the city is also aware of and wants to make note of, that for construction plan review, the applicant needs to make sure they coordinate with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Kentucky Division of Water appropriately with the mapped blue line streams on site. And this one in particular, which is near the boundary of the site, you can see the blue line I drew in there. It goes through a lot. There's going to be some construction here for the bulb of this roadway that will likely impact it. So the coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Division of Water should include the construction of the roadway and the future culvert pipes that might be required for development. And that's something they can do during construction plan review. The other blue line stream that was observed is on the opposite side of the map or the development, and it's at this existing pond on track 33. It's the head of the start of another blue line stream, so they should address that one also. One comment we had during TRC, and just for clarification, is, and I'd like the applicant to address this when they speak, is this Lot 5 has a natural draw, and currently it doesn't show really how they're planning to address the stormwater. It's likely that they could be grading it all flat to go to this catch basin, number one, or they could grade it to retain this draw and have a structure to allow the stormwater in. So if they could just address that at their presentation, that'd be great. The other comment was with regard to the entrance. As Brian said, this is off Kentucky Highway 22, so it'll require a KYTC encroachment. They're also asking for the variance for that width, which is about 2 inches less than the required 50 feet. With regard to site distance, again, we're not typically, well, we were looking at site distance because it was a concern that was brought up. Based on my field inspection and review of online GIS and contours, it looks like the site distance is provided. The site distance that's required for 45 miles an hour is 500 feet or 430 feet, depending on which direction you're looking to turn. The actual site distance that's provided appears to be 750 or 575 feet, so they're within that range. Even if the road were evaluated at 55 miles per hour, which it's actually 45, but if you were even to look at the higher speed, it appears to be provided.
And Mr. Sutherland, I'm going to interrupt you. The city of Pewee Valley also had a consultant look at the site distance, and I think I forwarded yesterday to you the
Yes.
same, and basically you both concluded the same.
That is correct.
Condition.
That's correct. So that's the extent of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Silliman. Mr. Ward.
Can I use this or don't?
Yeah, Jay, he's going to use the overhead.
Hold it over your head.
Go ahead.
I did forget one comment that was on there, and I glazed over it. There was also a concern with regard to the proximity of the existing church entrance to the proposed entrance. We've looked at that, and in the absence of a traffic assessment right now, the applicant has, we've been in discussion with them, and they have provided some alternatives to try and mediate or remediate that, and they're going to discuss that.
Yeah.
So.
They're not going to.
All right, Mr. Ward, you're up.
Charlie Ward, the Environmental Health Director at Oldham County Health Department, 1786 Commerce Parkway. So on June 27th and 28th, we did a preliminary subdivision site evaluation. Took 2 days. just a heavily wooded lot with a piece of a mini excavator, so it was kind of slow and arduous, but it was a good 2 days out in the woods. So of the 36 lots, there are 21 test holes that were dug. You can kind of see my random numbers, the 2, the 3, the 4. Don't look at the lot number itself. But preliminary subdivision site evaluation is just random sampling of the area. It's not specific to each individual lot, but just expectations of what's to come. Overall findings, nothing showed to be unsuitable. Majority was unsuitable. Majority was suitable and provisionally suitable, meaning conventional on-site sewage or septic systems will be applicable for this subdivision. All of the properties are more than 1 acre, so they meet the county ordinance set in May of '89 that said anything by on-site sewage has to be an acre or more, so that was satisfied as well. Topography is a concern, but it's something that will be addressed if and when houses are to be built, because I'm sure as you all have heard me say before, I'm going to go back out there and do this, not 36 times, because the existing homestead has a septic system that's grandfathered in, so I won't be addressing that one, but I'll do 35 more site evaluations for every single property to know where their primary septic system, size to punk's bedrooms, and where the repair for that lateral field will be as well on the property. So overall, I feel very optimistic about the area. I know some of the drainage and concerns, but I think I'm looking at it infantile stages, and later on those will be addressed and diversions and things can be made into place. But overall, rather good area when soil quality when it comes to on-site sewage disposal.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. So, in the interest of giving Mr. Ward part of his day back, we'll go ahead and look for questions of Mr. Ward at this moment, if the commission has any. Mr. Douglas? This is for Mr. Ward
Just for
only.
him, so he can leave. Yep.
As far as like working with the builders on the septic and lateral lines that must, be placed, do you also work with the city engineers?
No. My role would be applicant comes in, submits an application to do a septic system. I go out with an installer, dig test holes, determine where that area is going to be. Then I get with the builder. Once I have a permit for the septic system, then I'm issuing the builder or the homeowner a building release letter to come back to planning and zoning, because I am first and last. I'm literally the first county agency person that's on the property, and then that system isn't installed until that house is like 80, 90% finished, at least when sewer's been roughed out. But no, I do not get involved with Pee Wee Valley Engineer.
So who ensures that the lateral and septics are not within, because there's several lots with the blue line stream?
I have setback distances according to KAR 902.185. Don't ask me to quote the rest.
I
just the
know
first
which
time.
ones you're
But
talking about.
there are certain setback distances that I have to abide by where it comes to drainage, retention, detention ponds, and lakes and impoundments. So those are all setbacks that I'm aware of and that I will keep back away from.
I just wanted it on record. I knew
Yes,
you did.
that is
so
me, and
just
I'm-
for the
Yes.
public. Thank you.
You good, Mr. Douglas?
Yes, sir.
And then the
Please.
applicant or anybody else have any questions?
Anyone else present wish to ask questions of Mr. Ward before he makes his departure?
Mr. Ward, John Talbot for the applicant. I just have a couple questions. In terms of your analysis, this is just for preliminary approval of the plan at this point, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And when you come back on to do your second and final assessment, that's going to be dependent on the size house that's put on the property, where the driveway is put, whether somebody puts a swimming pool, all of those factors that we don't know yet, correct?
That's correct.
And all that will be analyzed once you come back on the property at the final stage, correct?
If and when a house is to be constructed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Mr. Ward, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, Mr. Williams.
Good morning. So as Mr. Fogel
Let's
presented...
get your name and address
Oh,
for
that's
the
right.
record,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Thank you.
I'm out of habit because I haven't been here in a little while. Michael Williams, Director of Pupil Personnel, Oldham County Board of Education, 6165 West Highway 146, Crestwood, Kentucky 40014.
Thank you, sir.
So this is one of those weird months that your meeting doesn't fall after our meeting. So I can affirm that it will be approved, but it is slated for 15. It will be approved Monday. It is already on the agenda for us to approve it on Monday based on our agreement to the policies with the county. So basically, the serving schools would be Crestwood, South Middle, South High. Just based on current enrollments, those capacity percentages puts that campus at 110% of capacity. When you add in other subdivisions that feed into that campus line, which would be Parkview and Royal Oaks, that brings the final capacity up to 116.38% of capacity, which would then garner the 15 permits or units per year. So,
All right. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Okay. That will conclude staff's testimony and presentation, and we'll move into testimony. Questions from staff? Questions for staff now, excuse me. Thank you. Any questions for staff? Mr. Falvey.
Mr. Sullivan. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly on the blue line streams. That would be determined, approval would be determined after they get with Army Corps of Engineers, and they have to abide by all those restrictions, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it will be done, it just won't be done here.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. And then I've got a question then for you. I just want to be sure that, can that be made as a binding element, or does it need to be?
Well, we have a standard binding element that says the construction plans must comply with all established federal, state, and local ordinances and requirements at the time of approval, and record plat will not be approved until all standards are met. That's our standard condition of approval. I think the mayor has a separate one that he wants to present regarding specifically the Blue Line Stream, and I don't know if it might be appropriate to ask the mayor to come up, which we can add. I don't think it's necessary, but, you know, in working with the city of Pewee Valley, we can add it, so.
This may be a good moment for that. Mr. Mayor, please approach. We're going to need to get your name and address. We'll need to get you sworn.
Bob Rogers, Mayor of the City of Pewee Valley, 7614 Woodridge Drive. Do you want to swear me in, or?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Having a binding an element, city attorney.
Get a little closer to that mic if you don't mind,
It's
please.
a binding element for when it comes to the Corps of Engineers and the Blue Line Stream. It was drafted by the city attorney. I can give you a copy, and
After you read it.
Jim Silliman has confirmed that there are blue line streams on the site that will be impacted by construction. Therefore, a note should be added to the plans, or a condition of approval should be imposed to require the developer to get its plans approved and permitted through the United States Corps of Engineers. And I have talked to the Corps of Engineers and read this to them, and they said it was fine.
Thank you, sir.
Would you like for me to?
Sure, you have to
Yes,
give me
sir.
that. When we get to the conditions of approval, if we get that far, we'll add it.
All right.
From what I just saw, it looked like Blue Line Stream was running right through a cul-de-sac. So, anyway, I would ask that you review that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Marsh.
Mr. Fogel, you made a comment that the entrance from 146 was only to be, it was not accessible or not to be accessed by the residents. How is that to be controlled? When I look at the drawing that you provided, I don't see how that is actually going to be controlled from being a pass-through.
I'm going to defer to the applicant to answer that as far as what they're specifically proposing there. But they are saying on the preliminary plan that access to that private driveway, which crosses over the railroad track, would just be restricted. So your question is, how is that being restricted? To the two outlots that are adjacent to the subdivision but are not a part of the subdivision.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Douglas.
For the county engineer, please. Have you spoken to the Pee Wee Valley City engineer about the stormwater quality plan?
Yes.
And is he available here to testify today?
No, the city engineers currently, I believe they're transitioning. We found out yesterday they will be having a new engineer come up. The mayor can explain if he'd like to also, but
But there has been,
the current one is leaving and they'll be getting a
there-
new one, but
there
will-
has been discussion and
But there has been
coordination.
discussion, right? So he's not here.
Mayor Rogers, can you come forward? I mean, have you seen their quality management plan before?
What's that?
I guess I'll just ask the mayor. Mayor,
Well-
have you seen their stormwater quality management plan, your city that has one?
No, I haven't seen it.
Come closer, please.
No, I have not seen it.
Do you know if they do one?
The city? Uh-huh. So the city will issue a stormwater quality permit.
Permit.
That's correct.
Right.
And they
they've-
will review it typically based on similar standards that we abide by.
Okay.
So I think the mayor's answer was in relation to this development, not his own. They do have their own standards.
Right, that's
They
what
do
I
have
was
their own
making
review.
sure.
They coordinate with the county engineer,
Right.
and they issue their own permits.
I just wanted it on record.
Yep.
Thank you for asking.
You're welcome.
Mr. Douglas, anything else? All right, anyone else with questions for staff? All right, we will move into presentation from applicant. Mr. Talbot, you're up.
Good morning, John Talbot, Barden Werper Talbot and Roberts, Louisville, Kentucky, 1000 North Hurstbourne Parkway, Louisville, Kentucky, 40223. Good morning, everybody. The Planning Commission, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to go ahead and get your team sworn in? Anyone
That would
who's
be
going to
great.
provide testimony? Let's go ahead and do that real quick.
Okay. Bill and Luke, can you all stand up to get sworn in?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. We are here for a subdivision approval, and obviously this is a bit obvious, but it is not a zoning approval. And there is a difference between those two. Zoning approvals have to comply with the comprehensive plan, which is a discretionary type approval. This is just a subdivision plan on property that is already zoned for what we're proposing that we do on it. This property is zoned R2, and so for a subdivision approval, what we have to do is comply with the regulations, the specific black and white letter of the regulations, and it's what you call a ministerial approval, not a discretionary approval, so a little bit different than what you'll typically see here on a day-to-day basis. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that in relation to some of the questions you all had, particularly what the testimony was from the people and the staff, this is just a preliminary approval. It's a two-step process to get these things approved and built. You have to get preliminary approval, which is what we're here for today, of our plan, and then we will come back for the second stage of the development process for construction approval. And the reason for that is that if you had to get construction approval before you could do anything, you would never spend the money to do it. Construction approvals and planning is very expensive, cost prohibitive, and most developers just wouldn't go through the expense if they weren't sure they could build if they comply with everything. And so the preliminary approval is just to make sure that we're allowed to do what we want to do, provided that we comply with the regulations. And the regulations that are in your subdivision approval, which is what we're here for today, and then also provided we comply in construction planning for the other regulations that you heard mentioned today, such as with the Corps of Engineers and so forth. So that is what we're here for today. I'd like to also introduce our team here. We have Mark and Michael Banta. They're both Oldham County residents, and honestly, since 2008, it gets more rare all the time to have local developers in any type of case you have. You've got a lot of outer-state developers, so it's a real pleasure to have a couple gentlemen from Oldham County here on this project. And Michael brought his wife here too. But in terms of our planners, we have our surveyor is Bill, always trouble to pronounce, Knizer, sorry about that. Bill Knizer with Meridian. And in my presentation, I say it's a landscape architect engineer. He corrected me on that. They are surveyors, they're not engineers, so that was my fault. But they're here to give testimony today about this project. As the staff mentioned, we had our neighborhood meeting. We met with the people, and we've also had many discussions with the neighbor, particularly the Church of Latter-day Saints. Early on, they asked us if we would consider allowing them, their church members, to have access to our road, our road access that will go out to Kentucky 22. You will see some slides on that. Yesterday, I think, actually Friday of this week, we reached out to them and told them we would give them access. They've now decided they don't want it. So that is off the table, and you'll see a couple slides in my presentation that we'll go over very quickly. This shows the zoning. Again, it is R2 zoning. This property was zoned many, many years ago, I think several decades ago, actually. So this was identified as property that's appropriate for this type of development. R2 typically allows smaller lots than what we have. All of our lots are at least an acre, and some quite a bit larger than an acre. And Pewee Valley's regulations actually require R2 to be at least an acre. So we're in compliance with all of those regulations. You can also see Kentucky 22 to the north of us. There's a little bit of commercial zoning to the east and west of us. And so we think this is an appropriate place to have this type of development, not to mention that it has already been zoned for that. This slide shows the aerial with our development plan on top. Again, you can see our entrance. It's what you call a flagpole lot, which goes to Kentucky 22. And that's how you will get in and out of our development. This shows our plan, shows some of the details on it, and I'm going to have Bill come talk about that in just a moment. There's a couple things I wanted to cover first. This shows our entrance that was discussed. This is the one off of Highway 146. This is not going to be our entrance. Our entrance will be to the north off Kentucky 22, and this will not be used for the subdivision. This will be used for some outlots, but it will not be used for the subdivision itself. This shows the site from Kentucky 22. The site is on your left. And this shows the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's two slides on this. We had difficulty getting both of their entrances. So let me talk about the first picture. The first picture shows their entrance and exit that's to the west of their site. And then the bottom picture shows the other entrance on the other side of their property. That is the one that's closest to our exit point. And there's been some discussion about whether or not it's a good idea to have those two entrances close together. The truth of the matter is it's probably not absolutely ideal, but it complies with all the regulations. Kentucky 22 is a state road, so it's not controlled by the county. Ultimately, we will have to comply with what Kentucky Department of Transportation tells us that we need to do, and we will do that. What we've been told so far is they don't think that that is an issue. I know Diane Zimmerman, also on behalf of Pewee Valley, she conducted a study on site distances. She confirmed in her report, and that was not our expert, that was other experts trying to verify what we were doing, that there are no issues with site distances. So I don't think there's going to be any issues with that at all, but the question is, if there is, we will comply with it. Now, some mention was made about the traffic assessment, and a traffic assessment is really like a very pared down. It's like a mini traffic study. In a subdivision approval where you don't have zoning authority, really the impact of that is pretty limited, particularly where we have a state road, because it's not going to be the county's decision on what we have to do with this road. It will be the Kentucky Department of Transportation. But we have prepared a binding element, and this is what we propose to put on it. And, I don't know if we...
Jay
can
wants
you
to
give
go
us
on the
overhead?
overhead.
Perfect. This was the binding element that we had proposed. The applicant shall complete a traffic assessment, provide 2 KYTC, and comply with all KYTC requirements made on the basis of such assessment. Now, we're not trying to get out of this, we're going to do it. You will have in your regulations, it's section 3.2, the ability to give conditional approvals, which you'll probably do all the time. So this would effectively be a conditional approval, what we're asking for today, saying we will do that, and we will, as long as we comply with getting that traffic assessment done and comply with everything that KYTC says we have to do as a result of that traffic assessment, then we can go forward with our project. And so that's the bonding element that we ask. Since we have this out, I'm going to switch gears slightly, because I've got one more bonding element that I had discussed with the church.
Slide that up a little bit more. There you go.
And Mr. Porter is here on behalf of the church. We have discussed this binding element, and this was acceptable to them. The applicant and any successor or assign will follow all regulations pertinent to stormwater drainage from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints properties and shall not impede any such drainage on applicant's adjoining property. Further, applicant shall not create any new conditions which cause stormwater to flow onto church property. I believe that was acceptable to Mr. Porter, and after my presentation, he can confirm that. Brian, can I go back to my presentation at this point?
John, can I have those just for the?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
He does. Well, they're on the same, they're on opposite sides of the same piece of paper. So that is what we propose to do to deal with this issue. If we are required to do anything in terms of those roads, those entrances being close together, this binding element is confirming that it's, our approval is conditional in our compliance with all of those issues. We also have a waiver because since this is a subdivision approval, effectively, again, it is whether or not, the question is whether or not we comply with all of the regulations. The 50-foot, I guess technically we do not. I think that from a technical standpoint, 49.92 and 49.84 feet is in substantial compliance with that. We've been told by staff that we need to comply with the full 50 or get a waiver. And so here we are requesting our waiver. The distance that we're short at the most significant portion is about 1.5 inches. Statistically insignificant. We comply and provide everything to comply with all the basic objectives of what the right-of-way, 50-foot right-of-way requirement is done. Whatever you can do in 50-foot, I'm pretty certain that you can do in 49.94, 49.92 and 49.84 feet. So we think we comply with that. Additionally, under the waiver regulation of 9.1, there's another section, and you only have to comply with one. I think we comply with both, if it causes exceptional hardship. So if this waiver was not granted, the hardship would be that this 51 acres effectively could not be developed. We do think that's exceptional hardship, and in your regulations, it can be man-made or not man-made. And so effectively, when this development was made, it was supposed to hold 50 feet, and in fact, this is the deed for that piece of property. It was intended to have 50 feet. It says beginning at an iron pipe in the south right-of-way line of Kentucky 22 in the northeast corner of the tract, conveyed to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by deed book, blah, blah, blah. Thence was said right-of-way back line north, and it has the meets and bounds. And it's a little bit hard to see, but it does say 50 feet on there. So, sorry, it looks like it's cut off by that line. Or no, it's the very last part, 50 feet to iron pipe. So it was intended to be 50 feet. Effectively, what we have is just a discrepancy in surveying tolerances. And when they did that, they thought it was 50 foot. It was actually, with the more modern technology, you can see that it's about 1 inch, 1.5 inches short. I would ask if just Jim Silliman, you could come up. I'd like to ask you a couple questions about it. Mr. Silliman, you're the engineer for the county of Oldham County, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're familiar with road issues and regulations for the county of Oldham County?
That's correct.
And are you familiar with this 50-foot requirement for right-of-way?
Yes, sir.
And do we meet with the 49.92 and the 49.84 feet? Do we meet with the basic objectives and intent of that regulation?
I think so.
Okay, thank you very much. This shows our development, and what I'd like to do now is bring up Bill and ask him to explain the development and also address some of the issues that came up in terms of blue line streams, intermittent streams, and also some of the drainage issues. Bill, can you come up and address those?
Bill Knisner, Meridian Surveying and Design Services, 2249 Commerce Parkway, LaGrange. So we're proposing a 36-lot subdivision, and with this, we have, of course, some streams, blue line streams that Jim Silman had brought up, TRC, and of course, following with state, local, and federal regulations, we have to meet the requirements to get permitting associated with them. The one associated on basically the western side of the property with the existing pond that's there, we're going to be utilizing that pond as a retention basin, and we do not foresee any impact associated with that stream. We're going to leave it as it is. It flows, continues all the way down to Woldridge and continues on down further downstream. We are going to discharge into that pond, and we will have to meet all the requirements with the MS4 and county and Pee Wee Valley regulations on discharge and water quality. Associated with this site, we're going to have two separate detention basins because we are kind of sitting on a ridge. The ridge line runs basically down the middle where the existing Locust Estates is. So on the eastern side of the property, we're going to have to construct a detention basin associated with that, which we have some area planned out, and yet again, we're going to have to do, in final planning, decide exactly what that's going to look like, shape, size, and everything associated with it. Associated with the Blue Line stream over there, we will have to get permitting from Division of Water, Kentucky Division of Water, Army Corps of Engineers if we do disturb it. So that will come at a later date during planning. That's several years down the road, so we will tackle that as it needs. Associated with the comment of, I believe, Lot 5 and the grading associated with it, with kind of a swell running through it, we're going to try to alleviate disturbing it. We will add additional catch basins, head walls, whatever's associated with it to catch out water, get it into our system, and get it over to the existing pond that's on site. We've kind of set aside an area on there for septics where we're going to try to not disturb, so we can have a septic field and then also allow the through water to go through. Do I have additional comments?
Yeah. First of all, I don't know if you gave your title and your expertise and qualifications. If you could do that.
I'm a registered land surveyor in the state of Kentucky, and I've been working with, previously worked with Garber Chilton engineers for 20 years, so I've been doing this for a very long time. So I've done developments from subdivisions to commercial developments in the county and in Jefferson, Henry, and Carroll County for 20 years plus. So I do have a few years under my belt knowing how to do this stuff.
And can you comment on the intent and purpose of having the 50-foot right-of-way for subdivision requirement?
So the right-of-way requirements in the county are in twofold. You have a 50 and you have a 60-foot right-of-way requirement. 60-foot is a reserved for roadside ditches. At first, we were going to do roadside ditches, and then we have switched gears and went to a curb and gutter system with drainage pipes and whatnot to catch the water. Now, with that, we can reduce our right-of-way down to 50 feet. Now, by doing that, no matter which way we went with the drainage, we would be needing a waiver for the 50-foot requirement going out to Highway 22. Associated with that, as John talked about before, the intent of the property was for it to be 50 feet. Whether that was intentionally done back when they originally did the survey, I have no idea. We've done enough surveying down through the corridor of 22 to find out that it's just a systematic error in surveying over the years. The original points get missed, they get tore out by the state or utility companies or whatnot. So when someone comes back out and resurveys it, there tends to be a little error. When you're talking 1.5 inches, 2 inches in aspects of right-of-way, can you get all required utilities and a road in the 49.84 feet? Absolutely. We're only talking about 2 inches. So as long as we're not dealing with sanitary sewers, so that saves a lot of space for us to get the underground electric, the water, and the telecommunications within that 50 feet.
Thank you very much. I had this slide in there to show our drainage from the church. Hopefully with our binding element, we have this issue covered, but I'll put it up there. You can see that we actually, on the bottom right, you'll see that's where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints property is. The red lines are generally where our drainage will be, and that'll be underground drainage that will flow into that retention basin that you see at the top middle of the page. This shows our entrance and the entrance of the Church of Latter-day Saints that I already spoke about. And this was, I will go over these quickly. This was our proposal. Again, they had asked us to give us access to our road, and so we'd proposed those two different situations where they could do that, but we're now being told they do not want that. So, in terms of the lots, the density is required to be 1 acre. Our density is less than 1 acre. It's 51 acres. We have 36 lots, so our gross density is under 7/10 of an acre, and our net density is under 8/10 of an acre. Again, well within the density requirements of R2 in Pewee Valley. And our minimum lot is above the 43,560 square foot. It's 44,000, almost 45,000, and our largest is almost 78,000 feet. So we're well within the requirements of the subdivision regulations. And lastly, this just shows some conceptual ideas on homes that we think we'll have. Since they're 1 acre lots, we do think we'll get some larger homes, probably in the more expensive type category. And that is the end of our presentation, and we will make myself and our team available for questions. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Is there anyone else present wishing to speak in favor of this application? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Let's get your name and address.
Yes, sir. Steve Porter, 2406 Tucker Station Road, Louisville, 40299. I represent the Church of Latter-day Saints, and we have had numerous discussions with Mr. Talbot about this case. The church wholeheartedly supports the development, supports the waiver on the 1.5 inches difference. No problem there. We have had two concerns. One is the drainage, and we think that the binding element or condition of approval that John has put forward satisfies that. The other is the one thing that is probably still maybe in contention, and that is whether the new road right next to the driveway into the church property will be acceptable to the Kentucky Department of Transportation. Preliminary indications, I've been told, are that it will be acceptable, but one never knows what the final approval or lack of approval from the state will be. But we will await that determination by the state of Kentucky. We just had some concern, I think both parties have had some concern, that ideally it would be nice for those two entrances not to be so close, as John said. But the church entrance has been there for 20 years or so, and they have a right to keep that. And the new road is coming in, and if you approve that, and if the State Department of Transportation approves that location, then I guess we'll all be satisfied with it. But otherwise, we support this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter.
Can I ask a real quick question while you're up there, Mr. Porter? You gave me a written potential condition of approval that's slightly different than what Mr. Talbot put up on the overhead. Do you agree to his?
Yeah, we agree to his on the drainage.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the application? All right, there being none, we'll move on to testimony and questions by those opposing the application. Does anyone wish to provide testimony or ask questions in opposition to the application? We'll get your name and address for the record and then swear you in, please.
James Allison, 103 Castlewood Drive, Pewee Valley, Kentucky.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I'm not opposed to the subdivision, but I do have an area I'm concerned with, and I'm here today to ask the Planning Commission to consider a binding element to provide a pedestrian walk path from the subdivision out to 146. That would provide access for the residents to get into Pee Wee Valley for various activities we have in Pee Wee Valley during the year without having to get in their car, drive all the way around, and come in the other way. Most of the residents in Pee Wee Valley today can walk to town center to participate in the various activities we have down there during the year. This is a large subdivision, 36 houses, and I would like to see the residents have the same opportunity as other residents should they want to walk into town for these activities. I believe an easement could be provided along the lot that comes out to the existing railroad crossing there. I'm not asking for vehicular easement. This would be a walking path that the people could walk in, come over the crossing there, and then come into Pee Wee Valley. I would like to ask, though, that easement be at least 15 foot wide. Should there ever be a need for an emergency vehicle to get in through that entrance into the subdivision, 15 foot would provide that capability. But I'm not asking for it to be paved or anything like that. Just want to provide there's enough access should an emergency vehicle go in there. If there, for some reason there's an emergency and 22 is blocked, it would give them that opportunity. Hopefully it would never be used, but if we're going to add a walking path easement, I would like to see it at least 15 foot wide.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Is that all you have?
That's all.
You want to go ahead and get the applicant's response to that, or?
Let's see if there's any other people in opposition.
Fair enough. Anyone else wishing to ask questions of the applicant or provide opposition testimony? Please. Get your name and address for the record, and we'll get you sworn in.
Okay, this is Pat McAuliffe. My address is 10177 LaGrange, over in Smithfield, Kentucky. I represent my sisters and myself of the 305 Woolridge Avenue in Pee Wee Valley, Kentucky.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and get you sworn in.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Before you get started, can we get the spelling on your last name?
MC, capital AULIFFE.
Thank you. Okay.
My question is the access or the lack of access or denial of access to the railroad crossing. I'm looking at this map here, and that road that the subdivision people are going to use goes right across that road. So how are they going to stop them from using that road and still allowing the original residents to get out?
I will give the applicant an opportunity to answer that. Anything else that you wish to address?
That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Opposition testimony or questions of the applicant? I'm going to go ahead and settle out those two questions, Mr. Urban.
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
My client had stepped out, so Bill is speaking to Luke about the request about pedestrian access. Right now, we know we have the driveway, so as a practical function, people could walk down that and get to Pee Wee Valley without anything else being done. That driveway will be used for the outlot, for one lot. So the question is whether or not anybody will allow that easement. Luke, do you know any thoughts on that?
I'll need to get you up to the podium so we can capture you. Have you, yeah, we swore.
Yes.
Name
and address.
Luke
Name and
Banta,
address.
9502 Norton Commons Boulevard, Prospect, Kentucky, 40059. So allowing them to,
No, it would be here. Let me frame the question out
yeah,
for you.
sorry.
Rick.
Yeah.
He's not had any chance to think about this, so we're catching him put him a little bit on the spot. The request has been on the road, the driveway currently to 146.
Okay.
Can we provide some kind of pedestrian access so people from the subdivision would have the ability to walk, not drive, to Pee Wee Valley if there were any events there? I guess the option would be people could use the driveway if we allowed an easement, but then that would be encroaching on the current resident that is going to retain that property. Or do you provide build a new sidewalk alongside the road and give an easement along that. But again, the question I think is for you to consider is whether or not you want to spend money to build the sidewalk, and or two, whether or not you want to burden that piece of property with an easement for people in the subdivision to use it for pedestrian access.
I guess my concern would be to have a sidewalk that's going to go across the tracks. So if they're walking from Pee Wee Valley to the subdivision, if I put a sidewalk there, then needless to say, I'd be worried that people are crossing over the tracks, not by car, but by foot. So I wouldn't be inclined to grant that at this time.
All right, well, so I didn't catch that gentleman's name, but the driveway will be there. I suppose to the extent people want to trespass, they could probably do that. But Mr. Banta's concern is for safety, having to cross the railway line, so he doesn't want to be responsible for that. The second question was, what was the second question that gentleman had?
Access to the lots.
Access to the lots from that driveway. The driveway will only provide access to the one lot, the one outlot. It will not be connected to the subdivision. The subdivision's access in and out will only be through Kentucky 22.
There is, can I ask a question about that? On the plan, there's a note that says existing entrance from Highway 146 only to be utilized by outlot and two other parcels located on the drive. Can you
Bill,
point to those two other parcels? And I don't know, Bill, if that's maybe get the...
Yeah, I'm going to use a cursor here. So currently, right now, this lot right here, and there's a lot right here that have rights to use that drive. With this, we're going to use one outlot to allow for our third access off of an access easement that is required, that we can't have in Oldham County. So these three lots are still going to retain the use of the access easement to cross 146. There was also subsequent an additional access easement placed on this property over here that is to use that access point. We're going to remove that. Those three lots over there will only be using access on through the subdivision. The other access easement will be abolished once the record plat is recorded.
Can I ask you, why is the outlot that's 1.39 acres not going to have access off of the subdivision road?
The outlot, is your dad still playing running? Oh, you are. Yeah, so they're going to keep that one outlot. Their intention is to try to keep the entrance the way it is so that it still has that view of the historic locust. So that is why we're having the outlot be a separate parcel as compared to including that in the subdivision itself.
Can I keep asking questions?
Keep going.
Well, and this is partially to answer the Mr. McAuliffe's question, is that outlot or any other access would require an encroachment permit from the city in order to connect to this subdivision. And I'm going to say on behalf of the mayor, I'm sure that would not be granted. And he can nod yes or no or come up to the microphone if he has anything else to say about it. So
Record shows he's nodding. Thank you.
But that again is, it doesn't show a connection of that access drive to that outlot and the other two lots to this subdivision. So once we go to construction plans, and you correct me if I'm incorrect, Bill, once we go to construction plans, you will not show a connection to that outlot from the subdivision, so it would never connect.
Right, correct.
All you have? Mr. Douglas, please.
I keep hearing somebody say the outlot plus the other two lots. Where are the other two lots?
Well, that's what he just,
what I
just asked him and what he just pointed to.
There's one that is right here. There was a lady that's living there. I think it's for sale right now. And then there's another lot that's right here. It has access using the access easement for that crossing.
On the plan, am I correct that it's the outlot of 1.39 acres?
Yes.
A property owned by Michael Banta and a
Yes.
property owned by Lynn Phillips?
Yes.
If you look on your plan, those are
So
the...
there is a narrow road that
There
goes
is
down by
a
the tracks.
Blacktop Drive.
Yeah.
That goes back to the outlot and the outlot is going to be using the drive for the locust and then the other additional 2 lots.
So is that on a recorded deed somewhere?
Yes.
Or a recorded plat?
Yes, yes.
But it's not delineated on this?
Well, I mean, it's beyond the aspects of the subdivision itself, so it's not shown on the plan itself.
Okay. Okay, I guess when we get to the commissioner's questions, I'll have some, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Mr. King?
please.
So the remainder of BT Drive is going to be removed beyond that? That will no longer exist? That is the
Right.
physical-
They will keep a portion of it, but it will not connect to the subdivision itself.
Okay, that will be completely, thank
Yes.
you.
Okay. All right, everybody done with that? All right, so anyone else wishing to provide opposition testimony or ask questions of the applicant? Please.
This is Pat McAuliffe. Just want to clarify, his answer to the lot, all the other lots not being able to get access to that road because their road will cross that road, is they're on their own honor, right?
Mr. Talbot?
I had trouble understanding your question. Can you repeat that?
Okay. Let me get, railroad tracks are right
there.
Right here, okay? So that drive goes all the way back here to the house, correct?
Correct.
This road goes right across that drive.
That's right.
So you're relying on their honesty not to come out that crossing?
Once we go to construction planning, if I can, where this road here and where the current road exists here.
Right.
The new road will be built here. Once the new road is built, there will not be an actual connection. That connection will be severed from that driveway. They will not connect.
So the original driveway is not going to be used for the original house?
That's correct. It will not be. The original house, the driveway is a little bit off.
A portion of it, is that what you're saying, Mr. Talbot?
The old driveway is, let me come up here real quick. Where this road is, Bill, this is not directly where the old driveway is, correct?
No, the old drive is to the.
Little bit
Yeah,
this way.
a little bit towards the east.
And so the old driveway here is all going to be removed.
Correct.
And where it will remain down here, it will be severed from your new road here,
Correct.
correct?
Correct. Okay.
So cars will not have access
No.
to it,
No.
correct?
No.
Thank you. Everybody clear?
And-
That's it.
Okay.
And I'm going to write a simple binding element or condition of approval that says that existing BT drive on the plan will not be connected to the subdivision road.
We have no issue with that.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? Testimony in opposition or questions of the applicant? All right, seeing none. Commission, how you holding up? You need a break? They accused me of being a slave driver last month, so you have an opportunity here. All right, we're going to move into questions from the commission. Mr. Falvey.
I've just got a couple, and I'll hitchhike on this last comment. There are homes back on that private road, right, that we've been talking about. There's actually 2, I believe, aren't there? So that road, who owns that road? Is that a private road?
That is within an access easement that the lots that the road run over it is theirs to maintain at their discretion. So, being said, there are ownerships, and if we can put it up on the overhead, I have a copy of
Need to cue the overhead, please.
that shows where hopefully the original deed book and page in which that easement was granted for the crossing.
It's coming up.
So this was
And you
a
can,
plat that was
Bill,
done.
you can zoom in if you push
in-
the zoom button.
So this was a plat that was recorded back in 2020, and it shows the 20-foot ingress-egress easement as recorded in deed book 365, page 143. That is the one that goes across the CSX Railroad. That's the existing crossing that you see when you're looking up towards the Locust. That road feeds over to the property that's owned by Michael, and then over to Miss Phillips' property. That is the one that we're going to use for the outlot. Once we build the subdivision, that access to the subdivision will be removed. There will not be a direct access to 146. When we're dealing with CSX, they are very particular about their stuff. So we are just going to remove that. We don't have to worry about crossing the railroad tracks associated with any other lots besides what's already been approved by CSX.
But the outlot will be, the outlet that you all are keeping will be on that road.
Yes, it will be on that road.
So my question is, who's going to maintain that road of the outlot and the two other properties?
That is up to the ownerships of the outlot and the two other lots to maintain that road. It is a private access drive. It's not an actual road itself. It's not a public road.
And there's no agreement
I'm sorry, Mr. Falvey, that's separate from this subdivision consideration?
except for the outlot.
Well, no, because he showed you that it's part of a existing access easement already. And again, it's outside. That outlot is not part of this subdivision plan.
Okay, so we don't know who's going to maintain that area through there.
That's all back to the recording of access and maintenance agreements that we currently use, but as of time, I don't know have been recorded or if they exist.
Okay. I've got a couple others.
Please keep going.
I have a question. Is the land not part of the history register? It's not in the history register, the land itself? I know Locust is on the History Society, but is the land on it?
I think the home is a historical home, but not the property. Yeah, just the home.
Ms. Davis, anything else?
No.
Mr. Douglas? All right,
Can
Ms.
I
Falvey,
continue?
Come on.
Speaking of the home, so it is on the historic register, I'm pretty sure. And are any of the plans are to just sell that home? Or any of the developers going to take it themselves? Or
We're going to preserve the home. That's going to remain, and that'll be on its own separate lot.
Yeah.
It will be a home for people to purchase, correct?
Right, okay. Track 5, the drainage, if you'll just once again say, I didn't quite get how you're going to handle the drainage on track 5.
Okay, the question was brought up by Mr. Schilleman about the swale running through track 5.
Can you point out track 5 on this?
Track
while
5 is right here. It has a little low area running through here. Between TRC and today, we've decided to kind of highlight an area where we're going to reserve it for septic so that we don't disturb that area. That happens at times to time just to make sure that we don't disturb it, and Mr. Ward's evaluations are preliminarily and at final are the same. So associated with this swell coming through here, we do have a catch basin planned here, and we can add additional drainage structures as needed, whether we need to pick it up with a head wall in the right-of-way out here or a additional catch basin along the road there. Since we are doing curb and gutter, most of the time the stuff does get graded and it grades to the road, and we use the road as the transferee of water to the underground system.
And you'll know more when you do your construction plans, I
Yeah,
guess.
we will not know until we have the final plans at that time.
You good, Mr. Falvey? Thank you. Mr. Douglas?
Yes, Mr. Talbot. I know you're working with KYTC on the right-of-way dimensions and the assessment. Have you been in communication with KYTC and the county about the study of widening 22?
About widening 22?
I don't know if Mr. Urban can speak to it or Mr. Solomon, but there was communication about areas of 22 being widened?
Yeah, we did, completed a study last year with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet on Kentucky 22 all the way from Murphy Lane and actually the Oldham County boundary to the 329 intersection, that we call it the Dairy Queen intersection. And there were not only spot improvements for intersections, but also idea that in the future, Kentucky 22 would be widened.
So I didn't know if you had been in conversation.
I have not. Bill, have you had any discussions with KYTC about the widening?
No, no. The only discussion I've had with KYTC was strictly associated with the new access road going out to 22. Yet again, when we're dealing with KYTC, when they say, well, we're going to widen the road, it could be next year or it could be 25 years down the road. So Jason Richardson, who is the gentleman who does the permitting, he did not mention anything about any upcoming projects, but yet again, he might not be the person who knows the answer to that question.
There isn't a project currently at this location.
There is?
There is not.
There's not.
Yeah. But
So-
it's part of the bigger improvement plan, and like Mr. Knizler said, some point in the future, it will be widened.
So my question is to their engineer or surveyor and our county engineer and to you, do we have to reapproach this if that happens with that 50-foot, the waiver being at 49.84? I don't know how they did the survey to see if more right-of-way has to be taken for 22 in the future. Does that come into existence, or does it narrow even more?
No, no. When you look at it from the front to the back, it's pretty much way stays consistent of the 48, 49 feet. So there's not going to be any change in the actual right-of-way width to go from, say, Kentucky 22 back towards the subdivision.
Okay.
That was something I took a look at, and I wanted to make sure that there was no additional problems associated with it.
Okay, you answered that question. That was great. My next question, I guess, would be to Mr. Porter. I guess he's representing the church.
Yes, sir.
On that binding element, it mentioned stormwater from the church, correct?
Correct.
Does that make, is the water running from the church to the
The natural
subdivision?
drainage there is from 22 across the church property down to the Locust Estates property. That's the natural flow. And so for forever, so that water has gone. And all we wanted to do was just be sure that they didn't do something to stop that flow so that it would back up onto the church parking lot and to the church property. Actually, not just the parking lot, but the church also has a large green space that they don't want to have it back up. And I think the binding element that we have worked on basically says that they won't do anything to cause any backup onto the church property.
Okay.
Thank
I just wanted a clarification because it just sounded like you were taking on something else. So,
Thank you.
thank you. At this point, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Anyone else? Questions from the commission? All right. With that, we will move into rebuttal evidence from the applicant. Mr. Talbot?
I don't think we have. I think we've covered everything at this point.
Thank you. Rebuttal from opposition, those asking questions. Anything to add? Fair enough. Opposition, anybody who wishes to speak with a final statement in opposition? Must have already provided testimony. Thank you. Mr. Talbot, your final statement?
I'll be very brief. Again, I just want to reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning. Again, this is for a subdivision preliminary approval. And so, in other words, we have to comply with your subdivision regulations, which we have. And just because if you approve us today, that does not mean that we can build all 36 of these lots. In the second phase of development, that's when we'll go through construction approval with Mr. Ward, with Kentucky Department of Transportation, with the Corps of Engineers. we still have to comply with all of those things. And if we do not, we will not be given building permits to build what we wish to build. So keep that in mind. To the extent those are issues for another day, not for today. We think this is an entirely appropriate development for R2. It's been zoned this way for a long time, and it'll be a good addition to adding to the housing stock in this community. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. That closes presentation. Mr. Urban, will you frame this up for us, please?
The first consideration is whether or not the waiver that was requested is appropriate or not. On page, I guess maybe 4, yes, 4 in your staff report, there's just some guidance on a motion for either approving or denying that waiver. This applicant, in about page 9 in your staff report, has submitted a justification statement, which you can rely on, either that justification statement or evidence and testimony that you heard today.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. All right, guys, so you've heard the marching orders.
The waiver
This
request.
is the waiver. Mr. Douglas?
I just had a point of order. So it just,
Waiver and preliminary
Well,
plan.
I don't know why Brian put it that way. We always
We
take
will
the
take them
waivers
separately.
separately, because if you chose to deny the waiver, the subdivision plan is not approvable. So I want to have discussion about the waiver. We always do it that way first. So you're really just considering the waiver request at this point.
All right.
Mr. Falvey?
Then I move to approve Locust Estates waiver. It is in accordance with the purpose of intent of the Oldham County subdivision regulations. Is that satisfactory?
Mr. Combs?
Well, don't forget, you can add either statements made by the justification statement of the applicant or testimony that you've heard today.
And with the testimony I've heard today.
Mr. Combs, do we have an adequate motion on the floor?
That'd be fine, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Combs. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Halfling, thank you. We'll move into, discussion.
I have a discussion.
Please.
If Mr. Falvey would be willing to add in that it's not going to be a detrimental to the public good and would not impair the purposes or basic objectives and intent of the subdivision regulation, and it will not impair the desirable general development of the neighborhood and the community by approval of this waiver, if he would accept that also?
Thank you. And Mr. Halfling, will you accept that as the maker of the second? All right. Further discussion? Being none, we'll move into a roll call vote. Ms. Edgar?
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Halfling?
Yes.
Mr. Finney?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Winters?
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss?
Yes.
Ms. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Did we get Mr. Finn? Yeah. Okay, motion to approve the waiver has passed on a vote of 10-0. We'll now move on to the preliminary plan. Mr. Urban, we have 10.
Yep, okay, just counting. All right, your next consideration is the approval or denial of the preliminary plan. On page 4, you have a sample motion for either approval or denial on page 5. If you are inclined to make a motion to approve, there are, I have 8 conditions of approval. The first is that there shall be no significant changes to the Locust Estates preliminary plan as presented at the August 22nd, 2023 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing without review and approval of the commission. The second is driveway access to lots 26, 27, and 28 shall not be via the private residential crossing of the CSX Railroad and Highway 146. Driveway access to lots 26, 27, and 28 shall be from Locust Estates Road A as indicated on a preliminary plan. The third is that the Locust Estates preliminary plan and construction plans must comply with all established federal, state, and local ordinances and requirements at the time of the approval, and the record plat will not be approved until all standards are satisfied. The fourth, and Mr. Talbot, this is where you keep listening to see if you agree with these. The fourth is that the development plan shall be limited to 15 units per year, beginning at the first record plat. Number 5 is submitted by the applicant. The applicant and any successor or assign will follow all regulations pertinent to stormwater drainage from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints properties and shall not impede any such drainage on applicant's adjoining property. Further, applicants shall not create any new conditions which cause stormwater to flow onto church property. The sixth is the applicant shall complete a traffic assessment, provide it to the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and comply with all KYTC requirements made on the basis of such assessment. The seventh is submitted by the mayor of Pewee Valley. I rewrote it just slightly. There are confirmed blue line streams on this site that will be impacted by the construction. Therefore, a note shall be added to the plans, and a condition of approval shall be imposed to require the developer to get its plans approved and permitted through the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And then the eighth is the existing BT drive on the plan shall not and never be connected to the subdivision road.
Thank you. Those binding elements are acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. All right, commissioners. That's probably an earful, but we'll look to get a motion on the floor. Mr. Douglas.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve docket PZ 23-013, which is the Locust Estates preliminary subdivision plan, and that it is in accordance with the purpose and intent of the Oldham County subdivision regulations, specifically sections 1.2, subsections A, protects and provides for the public health and safety and general welfare of Oldham County. Subsection D, protects the character, social, and economic stability of Oldham County while encouraging orderly and beneficial development. Also, subsection E, protects and conserves the value of the land throughout Oldham County and the value of the buildings, and also improvements upon the land. And also, subsection I, ensures that public facilities are available and will have sufficient capacity to serve the proposed subdivision upon its completion. And also like to enter the suggested conditions of approval. There are 8 of them, which were mentioned by Mr. Urban. And it's on record, those 8, and I wish that we'd enter those.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Yes, sir?
I'm not positive, but I think Mr. Douglas said 013 on his docket number.
Needs to be on
017.
017.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Thank you,
Just
Mr.
make sure.
Finney. All right, Mr. Combs, do we have an adequate motion on the floor?
That's fine, yes.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Mr. Falvey. Discussion. Anyone questions? We will move into a roll call vote. Ms. Edgar.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss?
Yes.
Mr. Winters?
Yes.
Ms. Nasser?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Mr. Halfling?
Yes.
Mr. Finney?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And the motion to approve the preliminary plan has passed on a vote of 10-0. Thank you, everyone. We will break for a short 10 minutes before we move into the next docket item.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, don't worry,
Thank you.
that need to be sworn in. Mr. Douglas, Mr. Klingenfuss, and Mr. Winters. Yeah, you've been reappointed, so. You got sworn in? Okay, I didn't know that. Well, no, not here. But, well, I got a note that says that you need to be resworn, so all I'm doing is complying with my email I got.
So go visit the judge.
Yep.
All right, are we good? Jake, we good? Yeah, we're good. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We'll move into the next docket item. Ms. Edgar, will you please read the docket?
Docket PZ 23-018, zoning text amendment repealing and replacing section 250-050, short-term rental property of the Oldham County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And Mr. Fogel, you get the honor of the staff presentation.
Well, I'm going to share the honor this morning with Ryan Fisher, but yes, I'm going to get us started and then hand the baton back to Ryan, and then he'll hand it back to me, and we'll wrap it up. So as part of your all's staff report, we provided you with the proposal, which is to repeal and replace Section 250-050, which addresses short-term rental properties. As we get into this, based upon our experience with the Study Review Committee, we anticipate that there may be a fair number of questions. All questions are good, and we certainly encourage you to ask them any time. Where we're going to ask for your patience is that our standard response might be to you, we're going to get to that. And if we get to the end of today's public hearing and we haven't gotten to that, we'll certainly circle back and make sure we answer that question. But what we found with the Study Review Committee, as the public or the Study Review Committee members would ask questions, we would have to ask for their patience and say, give us a minute, we're going to get to that. So just real quick, notification of today's public hearing was posted on the county's website on July 31st, and legal advertisement requirements were fulfilled with the Oldham Mayor on August 3rd. And the proposal is to repeal and replace that particular section. So the question that leads to is, why would we want to repeal a section of the zoning ordinance and replace it? Oldham County is experiencing an issue where we're getting the introduction of commercial activities in residential neighborhoods related to short-term rentals. And it's not unique to us. We're a little bit unique from the standpoint we're trying to get out ahead of it a little bit, so we're not in the situation that you find in Metro Louisville, where they're getting dozens upon dozens of requests to locate short-term rental properties in residential neighborhoods, to the point that they've even discussed issuing a moratorium to afford themselves time to update their regulations. We're not there. We don't want to be. So we basically said, let's try to get out ahead of this a little bit to deal with the this particular land use issue. And really, this land use issue is being driven by changes in technology. That, you know, the hospitality industry now, you can book a place to stay on the website, on your phone, through hosting platforms such as Airbnb, VRBO, Flipkey, Home2Go, and others. And basically what we're trying to do is to get out ahead of this so we don't have the huge issue that some of the other communities have faced. And how we got to you guys, particularly today in August, is that the Study Review Committee has met and discussed this on 4 different occasions at their April, May, June, and July meeting. We've had a lot of good participation with the committee members and then also the public, representing all sides of the issues. So the generalized changes, and then I'm going to go into them specifically, and anything we present on the screen is identical to what you all were mailed. We've moved stuff around just for the purpose of trying to explain it in a more orderly fashion. But there's no changes to the word of the document that you all were provided with your staff report, but it is going to get moved around on the screen here.
Brian, I don't mean to interrupt your momentum, but I want to point out, first of all, too, that there was a significant court case which really defined what a short-term rental activity was. Hensley versus Gadd went to the Kentucky Supreme Court, and the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that short-term rentals are commercial in nature. So that was one of the significant reasons why we're making these changes.
All right. So the sections we're going to go over today are updated definitions. Then we're also going to address where short-term rental properties are allowed and what zoning review process you have to go through to get permission to locate a short-term rental property in your house. Our operating standards, which we've had to modernize to reflect the fact that short-term rentals oftentimes are having a negative impact on their neighbors and their neighborhood. Then what the permitting process is, we made that a proposal where it will be more stringent. And then we also came up with some more stringent processes for dealing with the bad actors out there. That, you know, we have times that even though we have regulations on the book, we have people who don't comply with that, and we needed a more effective means of dealing with that. And this is where we're really going to jump around a lot here. The definitions in the zoning ordinance are organized alphabetically. That's the way the whole ordinance is. So the proposal is written alphabetically, but for presentation purposes, we're going to jump around a little bit because these 14 definitions really kind of form the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish in the ordinance itself. So the first one that you see there at the bottom of this page that's highlighted in blue is short-term rental property. And basically what we're saying is what it is. It's a dwelling unit or a portion of a dwelling unit that is advertised for rent for transient occupancy in which no meals are served for a time period less than 30 consecutive days. We do have land uses similar to that in the zoning ordinance now, and we're not proposing any changes to those. So we even put down here in the definition that, you know, if the zoning ordinance elsewhere defines what a bed and breakfast, a boarding house, or extended stay lodging, hotel, motel, or recreational vehicle, we're not proposing any changes to those definitions at all. It's just we want to define what a short-term rental property is. The next definition we're going to look at is a transient guest. That's the person who books a short-term rental. And basically, we're just saying it's a person who's exercising transient occupancy of any rooms, lodgings, or accommodations at a short-term rental property for a period less than 30 days. And then a host. The host is basically the owner of record of property where a short-term rental or portion of is established for people to stay on a transient basis. And we've broken that down into two categories, which are significant as we get into the regulation, you'll see. One is a non-owner occupied host. Okay, a non-owner occupied host is an owner of record of the property whose primary residence is not located on the same lot or immediately adjacent to the proposed short-term rental property. And then the second category we have would be an owner-occupied host, who is the owner of record of a short-term rental property whose primary residence is located on the same lot or immediately adjacent to the short-term rental property. And as we get into this, but I'm going to kind of make a commentary here of what we heard through the study review committee public hearings, and then also what our Board of Adjustments have experienced and what we've experienced in terms of enforcement. There's a much different impact with an owner-occupied short-term rental. The owner is there. They probably have a respect for their neighbors to make sure that they're not having a negative impact on their neighbors versus a non-owner occupied short-term rental. The non-owner occupied short-term rentals we are finding oftentimes are a business entity that may be located out of the state. And we've also had some that are located out of the country who have made applications with an interest of locating a short-term rental in a residential neighborhood in Oldham County. And due to that, down here under this, we specifically say an owner-occupied host can include a person, a personal or family trust, limited liability partnership, or limited liability companies, all of which must consist solely of persons and not a business entity. And the reason we did that is that oftentimes for tax or estate planning reasons, you may have a property owner in Oldham County who puts their home and their property in one of these organizations, but they still own the property, and we didn't want to exclude them from the ability of asking to establish an owner-occupied short-term rental. We define a business entity, which is basically a corporation, partnership, or any other legal entity that is not a person or a personal or family trust. Primary residence is the main home of an individual where they reside a minimum of 6 months on an annual basis. A manager, and a manager is really important to mitigate and prevent any negative impacts a short-term rental property might have on a residential neighborhood. So a manager is an individual with a permanent address located within 25 miles, measured by driving distance from the nearest subject structure to the nearest subject structure of a short-term rental property, who is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the purpose of in-person responses to complaints regarding the condition, operation, and/or conduct of the transient guest of a short-term rental property. And based upon what we've heard before our Board of Adjustments, we've heard some applicants say, well, I have a camera or a microphone, and if something goes awry with my guests, I'm going to get a bing on my phone. And that's good. They've been notified. But then what we're saying with a manager is you have to have a person who is available to go to the property and respond in person to any issues that may be going on with that short-term rental. And then we also make sure that we have everyone understand that the manager is authorized by the host to undertake remedial actions to address compliance, maintenance, and safety issues. A bedroom is an area of the short-term rental property normally occupied for sleeping services in conformance with the Kentucky Building Code, which is going to address safety of the guests who are staying at a short-term rental property. Then we say, provide a definition for the number of bedrooms at a short-term rental property. And this is key in terms of determining how many guests are allowed to stay at a property. We say that a number of bedrooms in a short-term rental property unit as determined by the official records of the Oldham County Property Valuation Administrator's records. That's very objective. The PVA defines how many bedrooms are in a house. It's not just someone saying, well, I've got a pull-out sofa here, I've got a futon over here, I've got something in the basement. To help drive up the number of bedrooms, we're saying, okay, we need something that's not objective or subjective. We need something that's objective, and the tax records are very objective in terms of how many bedrooms are located within a dwelling unit. And then we define the maximum occupancy that would be allowed at a short-term rental property, and it is driven by the number of bedrooms. So the maximum occupancy would be twice the number of bedrooms plus 4 to determine the allowable number of transient guests at a short-term rental property. We define that a short-term rental property is required to get a permit. And when Ryan gets up here to talk about things, he'll give you some of those standards for obtaining a permit. And then just some, they're not miscellaneous, they're significant, but we're kind of getting to the tail end of the definitions here because they trigger certain events in terms of our permitting or enforcement processes. Change of property ownership is when the transfer of property ownership goes from one host to another host. Change of manager, if there's a change in the manager, it transfers from one individual to another individual. A hosting platform, basically, it's a website or a mobile app that is advertising and allowing transient guests through a host to book stay at a short-term rental property. And then the final and 14th definition are short-term rental property house rules. And Ryan will really delve into this. I mean, basically, we came up with some minimum standards that should be reasonable expectations of making sure that if you have a short-term rental property, that you are minimizing the impact on your neighbors. So it's basically minimum standards of conduct in which transient guests are respectful of the neighbors and neighborhood in which the short-term rental property is located. This is the land use chart that was provided with your all's staff report, and we're going to break it down into two areas to explain to you what the significant difference is in terms of what we currently have and what we're proposing. So currently, if someone is an owner-occupied host of a short-term rental, they're in zoning compliance, but they're still required to come get a permit. So it's a two-step process. If you're in zoning compliance, you then come and get a permit for that. Neighbors are not notified that a short-term rental is being established in that property. So one of the things that we're proposing is that anything that is an owner-occupied short-term rental is required to get a conditional use from the appropriate Board of Adjustments. And that's reflected right here. Any residential zoning district, which is highlighted in blue, would be required to come before our Board of Adjustments with public notice and a public hearing process to notify the neighbors that a property owner is proposing to take a portion of their home and turn it into a short-term rental property. Non-owner occupied short-term rentals currently have to go to the Board of Adjustments and get a conditional use. So there is public notification, there's public hearings, but what we have found repeatedly with the Board of Adjustments are residents are showing up and saying, what do you mean I'm going to be having transient guests turn over on a regular basis in my neighborhood? I won't know who my neighbors are. What do I do if there's a problem? And everything we're writing and proposing to you all is geared towards eliminating that and addressing it. So what we're proposing here is that if it's a non-owner occupied short-term rental, you don't have the option of asking for approval in a residential zoning district. You will have the option of going to a commercial zoning district because you have zoning approval, and then just get your permit. So it's a two-step process. You have to get your zoning approval, and then after your zoning approval, you get your permit. And then likewise with the owner-occupied, we're proposing anything that is non-residential would just be a permitted use. The zoning is appropriate if it's non-residential, but you're still required to get a permit and meet the standards that Ryan's getting ready to talk to you about. All right, we'll take questions anytime.
Brian, real quickly while you're on that one, in the very top line of the blue, it looks like it's an I, but it's really a T.
T, that's correct.
For
mobile home parks. Yes, mobile home parks.
SWF is solid waste facility.
Correct.
Yes.
Hey, Brian, I got one question. Are the current short-term rentals that have been improved already, are they going to be grandfathered in or not for when these come up annually?
They will
if
be.
you change
Yes.
all this.
Okay. Yeah, they will have some grandfathered or pre-existing legal rights in terms of their zoning approval, but they will be required to get a permit on an annual basis with the new regulations. But in terms of their zoning approval, yes, they have been grandfathered in, but then they have to comply with the new permitting and operating standards. So their conditional use, assuming they are a good actor and are not running afoul of the requirements, would not be taken away. All right, with that, I'm going to hand this over to Ryan, and thank you, and we'll see you back here in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Fogel. Mr. Fisher.
All right, relief pitchers in the game. Ryan Fisher, Senior Planner with Oldham County Planning and Development. So as Brian said, the definitions really give you that big foundation of what I'm going to touch on, and that is kind of three different sections. First is going to be the requirements and the standards of the regulation. We're going to talk about the permitting process, and then lastly, we're going to talk about what happens when that permit expires, what happens if we have to revoke that permit for some reason. We'll talk about that, and then I'll give it back to the starting pitcher again to finish it out as the closer. So with that being said, if we look at the screen there, we look at requirements and standards, and I'll just go down each one of these. I don't want to try to read the slide completely to you. Some of them I may, but we'll touch on these as we go down. So the first one is the host shall not establish, operate, and or advertise that short-term rental property without first having obtained and maintained in good standing a short-term rental property permit from Planning and Development Services. Currently, we get a lot of calls from individuals saying, hey, there's a short-term rental that's advertised. Tourism will also do that and say, hey, do you have this one listed? And so we'll start that code enforcement process through that. And then a lot of times requiring these individuals to come before the boards to get a conditional use permit because they've been advertising. So that's pretty the same as what's in there now, but pretty much saying you can't advertise until you come through and get approval. Number two, and this is consistent with the short-term rental property definition that Brian gave, shall only be available for transient occupancy for a time period less than 30 consecutive days. So anytime we're talking about a short-term rental property, it's anything less than 30 days. Anything more than that, we're going to start talking about long-term rental agreements and things like that, not really in with this standard. Number three, short-term rental property shall be limited to a single contractual transient guest at a time. Simultaneous rentals are not prohibited. Additionally, short-term rental property cannot be advertised on a hosting platform as concurrently available while under contract with a transient guest. So a lot of times if you have ever rented on a short-term rental website such as Airbnb, you'll go through to try to find your selected dates and they'll be blackened out. That's either because maybe the family might be staying in it at that time or it's currently rented. So that's really what that standard is saying, is you can't have it rented and have it showing us, hey, we can rent this to you as well. That would go back to being able to rent it concurrently, which is prohibited by the regulation. Number four, the contractual transient guest shall be a minimum age of 21. Number five, the host shall obtain, continuously maintain, and pay premiums for insurance policies that cover the short-term rental property as a commercial activity. Jim did talk about the Supreme Court case showing that short-term rental properties are considered commercial use. So we talked about this in the study review committee of showing that your insurance would allow you to operate your short-term rental on your property as a commercial activity. So that's something now that we're going to start requiring, and you'll see that when we get to the permitting process. That'll be something that applicant will have to provide and show us that they do have insurance allowing their property to be used in that commercial sense. Number six, the host or hosting platform shall be required to collect and remit all applicable room occupancy and sales tax required by federal, state, and local governments. I'm not the best person to ask how that process takes place. I do know that as the current person right now in our office who handles all these short-term rentals coming in, when I get 2 or 3, I will then send that list to our finance director as well as Oldham County Tourism to say, hey, make sure these are the individuals that we have permitted, and then they go through and collect those taxes and all that good stuff. So that is number 6. As we go to the next page, number 7, the host shall be responsible for compliance with any current applicable laws, and there's a lot of them mentioned there showing zoning, non-discrimination laws, property maintenance. Pretty much they're responsible for abiding by all of those different laws. Number 8, host shall use reasonable property management practices to ensure that transient guests and visitors to the short-term rental property don't create noise disturbances, engage in disorderly conduct, and or violate any provisions of the regulation. So essentially being a good neighbor and how we maintain that. In the past, we had used a term called responsible party. That has been changed as Brian went through on the definitions to talk about a manager and a responsible manager and how, as opposed to just going, oh, I got notified because there was noise, how they get to the site for in-person and handling of anything that might occur on that property. So once again, to be a good neighbor to those adjoining property owners. Number 9, the host shall post and maintain a copy of the current short-term rental property permit on the hosting platform. And this is the same as it is now. They're supposed to post it on the actual short-term rental website to show where it's properly permitted, as well as posted in a location at the resident itself. The host shall also post and maintain in the short-term rental property in a conspicuous location the following minimum house rules. So the first one is the name of the manager, the postal mailing and email addresses of the manager, telephone numbers in which the manager can be reached 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as well as the name of the host, the postal mailing, email address, telephone number where the host can also be reached 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The maximum number of transient guests authorized to exercise that transient occupancy. So once again, twice the number of bedrooms plus an additional 4 will give them their maximum occupancy. That as well has to be posted on the property. Evacuation routes in the event of an emergency. So how to get out of the building in the event of a fire, anything like that. Parking shall be on the same property in which the short-term rental property unit is located. Can't be on adjoining properties, can't be on streets. So when we look at that now, we're going to start looking at those parking requirements and figuring out if you've got enough room to park all the cars. So once again, being a good neighbor to not clog up the streets, not parking in other neighbors' properties like maybe we have seen in previous cases. The trash pickup day. Also, trash and refuse shall not be stored within public view in proper containers with closable lids. Any device that we have or machine that's utilized for amplification of sound shall not be audible, and we put that down at the adjoining property lines. We do know that noise carries, but if it can be heard across that property line, then that's kind of where the regulation is going to stand as far as that goes. And then outdoor and group activities shall not occur during the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Continuing with the requirements and the standards, any outdoor signage in those residentially zoned areas, if you have a short-term rental, there is no signage that is allowed. If you are in a non-residentially zoned area and you do have signage, then that has to go through and get a sign permit. Pretty standard with what's currently in there. In the regulation as of now, but yeah, no signage on any sort of residentially zoned areas that do have the short-term rental. And then we talked about parking a second ago, so it shall be provided on the same property in which the short-term rental property is located. And the minimum number of parking spaces for transient guests shall be determined by the maximum occupancy. So once again, based off the number of bedrooms, we give them a maximum occupancy, and then we're going to divide that number by 2.5. So that is the parking regulation. Noted this a second ago, but the trash and all that storage shall be outside of the public view and that closable lid. Any device for that amplification of sound, once again, shall not be heard across the property lines. And then the last one there, outdoor and group activities shall not occur between those hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. again. And such outdoor activities include, but are not limited to, swimming, hot tubbing, grilling, yard games, campfires, and anything else that you might throw in there. Talking about the permit in the next section and how we go through as far as a person getting a permit. So once again, you can't operate a short-term rental until that's approved through planning and development, and you go through this process and be registered annually. The application shall include 3 things, and that's the payment of our application fee, the completed application, and then all of this supporting information, which I'm getting ready to get into now. And that is the first one, the name of the host, their mailing addresses, email addresses, once again, where they can be reached 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the name of that manager as well, all of their addresses, email, mailing address, where they can be reached 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A floor plan of the current unit. This is something that's currently in our application now, so they're to show a floor plan of the unit, showing where the bedrooms are located, showing where those windows are located at, doors, as well as the locations of required smoke detectors. And then a new one really that is not in our current regulation, but a plot plan of the property showing the shape of the property, the location of the dwelling unit on that property, location of any other structures, the driveway, as well as those required parking spaces, showing where the vehicles based off that maximum occupancy would be parking on the property. The owner-occupied host, so we have the owner-occupied permits, which in the new regulation would be going through our Board of Adjustments, must provide proof of their primary residence and provide 2 documents to verify that primary residence. Currently, in our owner-occupied permits, which just come through our office and get approved at staff level, that is currently also a requirement. So I have them provide me a utility bill, driver's license, voter registration to verify that that is their primary residence. So those same different types of documentation are in this current standard that we're showing you today. But then a couple of well, not a couple of new ones. This one is a new one. So the proof of the insurance policy that covers that short-term rental property as a commercial activity, the applicant will be required to provide. And then lastly, a written statement that the applicant has confirmed that operating the proposed short-term rental property does not violate any homeowners association agreements or bylaws, condominium agreements, covenants, codes, restrictions, or other agreements that govern or limit the use of the proposed short-term rental property. And then lastly, we'll touch on the expiration of that permit, the renewal, how individuals go through renewing their permit, and then what happens if we have to revoke that permit for any reason. So consistent with our current regulations, all of our short-term rental property permits expire December 31st every year. Which makes me have a fun January, but that is a current regulation. That'll be in this one as well. So they ordinarily expire December 31st. We do have individuals, currently that come in and reapply early December. Some I have to send notification out to, hey, don't forget that permit expired. So that will stay the same. If any of these events occur prior to December 31st renewal date, it triggers an expiration of the short-term rental property permit and a required renewal application. So any of these bulleted points here, if the property ownership changes, they need to come in and get a new permit. If that manager changes for any reason, if when you came in to get the permit, you were using a property manager and then you've decided we're going to part ways with that individual, get a new one, you need to come in and redo that permit and let us know. Change of any insurance policy information, change in the maximum number of bedrooms. If they do home improvement, come in and get a building permit and add a bedroom, which would then change the maximum occupancy. They would need to come in and do a new permit for that. They just wouldn't go, oh, I've got a new bedroom, I'm going to add a couple more guests onto my occupancy. And then lastly, change in status of any previously approved conditional use. So if they went through the conditional use process with the appropriate Board of Adjustments, there were conditions of approval placed on that standard, and anything changed with that, they would need to come back for a renewal application and possibly even go to the Board of Adjustments to have that case heard again. For a conditional use. A renewal application grace period of 30 days will be allowed from the date of that triggering event. So a 30-day grace period if any of those bulleted points happen to occur that would require you to have to come in and make changes to the current permit. Short-term rental property permit shall be subject to revocation by the Planning and Development Services Director in the event of any of the following. Failure by the host to submit accurate and true information within a short-term rental property application. So if we find out there was something you put in your application which was untrue, lied, anything like that. Failure by the host to renew an expired short-term rental property permit by the ordinary December 31st renewal date. Failure by the host to renew an expired rental property permit that has been triggered by any of those events we just talked about a second ago. So changes in the insurance policy, changes in the manager, any of that, changes in the property owner. So the failure of the host to renew that would possibly trigger that event to revoke the permit. advertising on a hosting platform and occupancy that exceeds the allowable short-term rental property maximum occupancy. So if we give them a maximum occupancy of 10, we find out on Airbnb they're advertising, hey, we can have 16 people here, have fun. We find that out, that's something that we could take enforcement action on. Enforcement action undertaken by planning and development personnel regarding the operation of short-term rental property. And then 2 or more validated civil and or criminal complaints regarding the operation of the short-term rental property or any conduct of their transient guest. In the event that that permit does get revoked by the Planning and Services Development Director, that host can apply for an appeal to the appropriate Board of Adjustments and Appeals. And then in the event of the revocation, the host may not make an application for a different short-term rental on the same property for a period of 1 year. So if something happens to occur, the permit gets revoked, there's a year, can't do any more on that property. With that being said, we'll call the starting pitcher back in, and he'll finish up.
And it's going to be real quick. You know, we've gone through a lot here for you guys because it is a lot. And the Study Review Committee, again, has met on this on 4 different occasions. Long meetings, which is perfectly fine because that meant we had good discussions on that. Any decision that you guys make in regards to this, anytime it's a zoning map amendment, or in this case, a zoning text amendment, it's an actual change to the ordinance. So when you all make a decision, it's in the form of a recommendation to the 4 different legislative bodies that are specifically defined as being part of the joint unit, joint planning unit. So your all's decision will go to the fiscal court for their review and decision, and then likewise LaGrange City Council, the Crestwood City Council, and the Pee Wee Valley City Council. Just a couple of generalities to keep in mind. Tate's question was awesome because it brings out the point. Anyone who has zoning approval for short-term rental right now, they're grandfathered in. You know, they will need to meet our new standards in terms of the permitting, but their approval for short-term rental cannot be taken away if they're grandfathered in. And probably the biggest thing I took from all the Study Review Committee meetings, and then also sitting through the Board of Adjustments public hearings in regards to the non-owner occupied host is, you know, my neighbor, what we heard people say repeatedly, my neighborhood is made up of neighbors. I know who my neighbors are. When you start introducing a non-owner occupied short-term rental in my neighborhood, I don't know who that neighbor is anymore because it flips constantly. And when there's a problem, what do we do? So I think that drives a lot of what the Study Review Committee said. We need to fashion something to try to get out ahead of an issue that may be becoming a bigger issue in the future.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So, Mr. Urban, I guess for the next phase of this discussion, do we want to open it up for commissioners now to ask questions, or do we want to take public testimony?
I think it's, well, either way. It is a public hearing, so you do have to take people who either support or oppose the recommended text map amendments. Questions are always good because it may help clarify things for those that are in the audience that aren't as familiar with the regulation as we are. So I think open it up.
We're going to run through questions from the commission to begin with, and then we'll have 2 sessions, one for those speaking in favor of these proposals and those speaking in opposition.
Yeah, I think you can
again,
even
followed
blend
by
those.
questions.
Yeah,
we might,
you can even
we
blend
might,
it.
we
Yeah.
might. So let's start with questions from the commissioners. Who has questions? Ms. Nasser.
Okay, first question regarding permitting and grandfathering. Just want to clarify. So permitting happens it lasts until the 31st. They have to get re-permitted.
That's correct.
Okay, so someone who is a non-owner occupied that has been permitted to do short-term rental, and they come up on the 31st and reapply, they're non-owner occupied, which is not permitted. So by that, you're saying they're grandfathered, so they're still going to be okay unless they lose their permit because they didn't follow one of the guidelines, or? How does that-
Basically, yes, but I'm going to kind of explain that a little bit more. So, it's a two-step process. You have the appropriate zoning for short-term rental. So if they're pre-existing, they basically have the appropriate zoning for short-term rental. But they're still required to get an annual permit from us with these new standards. They're still required to get an annual permit right now under the old regulations. It's not as stringent an application process. But yes, their establishment of a short-term rental is grandfathered in on that property, and on December 31st, they need to renew their permit, which does not take away their grandfathered status.
Right. Brian, I'm going to clarify or correct something. Because we are not going to allow non-owner occupied in the residential zoning classifications, they really don't have appropriate zoning. But they are considered legal non-conforming uses because they've been permitted in advance.
Yes.
So they're called legal non-conforming use. And if that status changes at all, then they become a non-conforming use. So if they don't renew in time, or if they don't meet the deed restrictions of the neighborhood, or if they don't make appropriate applications for change of host or owner or whatever, then they would lose that non-conforming status.
That's a much more concise and better answer.
Thank you, Ms. Nasser. Is that all you have? All right.
I was
further questions?
practicing law.
Mr. Douglas.
How many are in existence for non-owner occupied hosts short-term currently that would have to be grandfathered in?
Yeah, I'll give you a ballpark answer to keep with the baseball analogies today. We have currently 28 permits this year. I would say probably 18 of those would be non-owner occupied.
And since I don't know the background and I'm not part of the study review committee, why was it determined non-owner occupied host short-term rental properties not be eligible to get a conditional use permit?
Let me field that. It starts with Hensley versus Gadd. When the Supreme Court of Kentucky determined that these are commercial in nature and people are investing in property, it seems pretty clear to me and to the staff and to the SRC that it is a commercial activity, which is not allowed because they're not living there. The investors are not buying these properties to live there. They're buying to make them a short-term rental.
Does this have any effect on builders, realtors, that they're not considered transit? And maybe Ms. Nasser could.
Well, I think
weigh in on this?
the better question is this a property right? If you have a single-family zoning classification and you have a single-family house, is it a right to have a short-term rental? And my answer is no, it's not a right. It's something new and it's regulated. Like you can rent it more than 30 days. We're not changing that. You have the ability to live in that house and use it as a single-family residence or rent it long-term for a single-family residence. Short-term rentals are not permitted by right, except in commercial or the other zoning classifications. So it really doesn't have an impact on somebody building a brand-new house by any means or buying that brand-new house unless they comply with their deed restrictions and the requirements of the permit. Even selling an existing house, it's not a right. You aren't granted automatic permission to have a short-term rental. It's a land use category.
You got a question?
That good? Okay. Mr. Finney. Thanks.
Mr. Douglas, we kind of looked at it, it's kind of like taking a residential area and putting a small hotel in it. So, now you've got a hotel instead of a house. So we don't want a hotel as your neighbor. So it becomes a hotel instead of a home. And so we're taking hotels out of residential neighborhoods. That's kind of the way we looked at it. Because it becomes a hotel and not a house.
With the exception of if you have an owner that owns a piece of property, and, you know, this is, again, another potential land use.
Another potential.
Well, when you compare it to a hotel, you know, that would be true of all of them. But we're allowing owner-occupieds to potentially take advantage of a opportunity or land use as the owner of the property who lives there. Just like home occupations. You can do a conditional use for a home occupation in certain conditions. And that's exactly why we put them all in a conditional use permit category, so there's transparency for all the adjoining property owners. And everybody gets to understand that could be a short-term rental next to them.
Yes, but still I think the thing that made it more transparent to us was it's not a hotel.
I understand the concept of an Airbnb and some of the other Verbo and all those others, that I think that's what we're getting to. But I just wanted a clarification that I know in this county, there's been times where a builder might build a house and someone's in the process, they've already sold their existing house and they're looking for somebody to occupy. So they go to property owners that have rentals and say, do you have something that's vacant for 2 weeks until I can get these people moved in? So reconsidering those short-term rentals, yes. I think that creates a different aspect the way we have it proposed as a non-owner occupied host. I think you're limiting the realtors, the builders in this community on finding access for those people instead of signing a long-term lease and then they break that lease. I mean, they're just getting around it, basically.
My response is going to be this. Jim Silliman and I go regularly, monthly, to the Building Industry Association meetings, and we talked about this. We had no representation of any builders, and there's none here today, of any builder in opposition to what we're proposing.
And if I could, you know, I think there might be a slight difference in the scenario you're asking about versus the traditional Airbnb. The Airbnb and VRBO and others are booked through a website. A builder may have a spec house that's available for someone to go into that they're never going to put it on Airbnb and VRBO. They're going to go directly with the person who's buying a house from them and saying, hey, why don't you go stay in this spec house while I finish up your house?
That may be true in some instances, but there is true if you look at property owners, not in just this county, but other counties, they may say, you know, you have a vacant home that's not having a tenant in it. Could I put somebody there in 20 days or whatever until they have closing on their home? So we're considering those short-term leases, I guess, in that aspect. And maybe I'm rising something here that I shouldn't, but I you know, maybe there's others here.
We do have realtors when we hear from them.
I know there are landlord, or there's property owners here that rent property too, so I don't know how they would handle that.
We've had several publicly noticed hearings about this in SRC, and in fact, no builder, no representative of any builder has come forward to say, I need room for this carve-out through several of those. First, so I think we're talking about a minuscule representation. On the other hand, we do have numbers and volumes of people coming saying, this is changing the dynamics of my neighborhood to have this type of use going on my doorstep, and we've got to have some relief.
Right, and I think
where we're going.
Brian's distinction is absolutely correct. You know, it's a different scenario when somebody just needs a transitional house for a short period and it's over. That house probably doesn't remain a short-term rental. If it does, they need to go through this process. And the ones we're really focused on are the ones that are coming in that are intentionally trying to raise additional revenue by renting their house short-term through a website.
And I'll give you some real estate insight. Most of the people that I see that need a transitional place to go while something's being built or they can't close on it right away is usually something temporary. That is, okay, yes, we're going to be out of town. A friend of somebody knows somebody kind of thing while you've got a 2-week window to close. Or it's usually, but that's rare. Most of the time it's long-term, more than 30 days to finish a build.
Well, and also, if in fact they want to do something that's 20 days, they can go to one of the permitted short-term rentals. So it really doesn't affect the builder per se. There are hotels, there are friends, and there are permitted short-term rentals.
Okay. Mr. Marsh.
I have a question. There are people who in this area who rent their homes out, for instance, for the Kentucky Derby, and they move out of their house and they rent that house. Will they need a permit to do that 1 week?
Well, technically, yes, but we always shake our head, Brian, is that for Derby and the PGA, for some reason, we all have this exemption that says, yeah, we won't make them. But technically, they are short-term rental and
So
should have
they're supposed
it.
to get a permit?
Yes.
But if they didn't, it'd be over with.
There's no
It'd just be
exemption
that 1
carved
week.
out in this language for them. Mr. Marsh?
The reality, though, Ms. Davis, is that it is a very unique cultural event. We all know it happens, and it's one of those things that you just let pass.
And I
you
think
know.
it would be impossible for us to regulate that 1 week event. Quite honestly, there's so many.
Resource set is just not realistic, so.
Right.
Mr. Marsh?
Thank you. 2 quick things. In section C, point number 3, a short-term rental property shall be limited to a single contractual transient guest at a time, dealing with simultaneous rental contracts. When I read that, the intent of that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that was to close a possible loophole where people could write contracts for more than 30 days, but then not have someone in it, and they could run them concurrently to try to get around?
That is correct.
Okay. So this is a way to try to close that loophole versus longer-term and short-term definitions.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And kind of what drives that, I mean, we have had cases, but a very specific case before the Board of Adjustments where the applicant who was non-owner occupied was denied their conditional use. And they basically walked away from the meeting and said, well, just fine. I'm gonna book it for 31 days and then, cancel it out when my person only stays there for 4 days and rebook it. So what we're saying from an enforcement standpoint is that, we could see on their hosting platform, do they have their days blocked out? And if there's a window in there where they're basically double booking, we know we've got an enforcement issue.
Thank you.
All right. Further questions? All right. Yeah, Mr. Falvey, please. Mm-hmm.
I maybe should know this, but I don't. What's a permit cost or run?
Initially, it's $150, and then every year it's $100
Okay, 150.
for the renewal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? All right. So we'll now move into
Just anybody. Yeah.
input from the public. I will ask anyone who wants to come to the podium and provide input, testimony, ask questions. They will get you sworn as you come to the podium. We're going to need to collect your name and address. So anyone who wants to speak, let's go ahead and get you stand up. We'll get you sworn in.
My name is Karen Morose Hunstiger, and I live at 1616 Crestview Drive, LaGrange.
Thank you.
Do you, raise your right hand.
Yep, go ahead if you want it.
Anyone else who wishes to speak, we'll go ahead and get you sworn now. Okay?
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed.
I have a question on page 6, the written statement. In it says the homeowners association agreement and bylaws, shouldn't it also say deed restrictions? Because you Jim, keep using deed restrictions and it's not written in words there.
CCRs and deed restrictions are synonymous, but maybe it should say it specifically.
That's my only concern.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to speak? Let's get your name and address for the record, sir.
My name is Blake Hazelton, 2644 Sheffield Court, LaGrange. That is in the Glen Eagles subdivision. Our subdivision has an HOA. We have 100 lots, 97 residents. I want to thank you all for your service to the community and the Planning Commission. It's just really a critical aspect. Quality of life is a critical aspect to what draws people to our community and keeps them. So the decisions you make here make a big difference, I think, in the quality of life that we have now and also that we'll have in the future. Our HOA supports the proposed amendments. Following up on the prior speaker, our only suggestion is that the HOA or condo association provides the written approval rather than the applicant. We've had 2 cases where we had people sign off on the form and say we're in compliance. We didn't even know they were there until we went to the city and asked for a listing of Airbnbs. And again, if you had the HOA or condo association provide the letter, then that's kind of a stepping stone to be able to move forward. So we're in the city of LaGrange, so when LaGrange considers this, we'll be approaching them with that idea, which we think will save a lot of time for people going to the residents and also for the hassles that are created when you're trying to move somebody out of an Airbnb that shouldn't be there in the first place. Again, thanks for the opportunity for public expression and to speak today, and thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Hazelton. Who else would like to speak?
I'm going to respond
please.
to that real quickly. I'm going to add that HOA or condo association, if one exists, because there are subdivisions where they have not maintained a HOA.
Yeah, that is somewhat of a problem, but in our case, we have covenants and restrictions, and we have them posted on our website. We haven't found that realtors provide that information to buyers, and some have told us that they look at that as a negative rather than a positive. But people locate, we think, in our subdivision because of the CCRs that we have in the first place. So all we would like is an opportunity to make sure that people don't show up and go through this whole process and pay their $150, and then we're sitting there trying to discuss how that happened. We do visit every new resident that comes into our subdivision, and the subdivision is in transition. We have an older neighborhood that's transitioning to a younger neighborhood, more kids, more people, and it's a wonderful place. Hope you get a chance to drive by there at some point in time and see what we're talking about. It is attractive for Airbnbs, but that's not a commercial activity that the residents signed up for. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, let's get your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Aaron Stack. My address is 1934 Clearview Drive. I'm a resident of Clearview Acres. I come in support of these proposed changes, specifically the changes under subsection B, which limits the AG and residential use to conditional use and does not allow the non-owner occupied use in those areas. We were a community that came before the Board of Adjustments and Appeals in June for an issue, for this precise issue where a company had bought one of the houses in our neighborhood. I wish these changes had existed at that time because they bought the property with the intent on using it as a short-term rental, even though our deed restrictions say residential purposes only. So we had to come before the Board of Appeals and Adjustments, and while we did win, we are the example that Mr. Fogel cited where the company basically said they're going to rent it anyways and try to get around the short-term rental rules. So now our community, which doesn't have an HOA and we don't have a coffer from which to draw money, we are in the undesirable position of to whether or not engage in a protracted legal battle with a corporation that obviously has much deeper pockets than we do. So while this, I know, will not help us, it will help communities like ours in the future. And I think, in my opinion, it is just it reflects the changing landscape in short-term rental properties that began in 2018, as Mr. Urban stated, with Hensley v. Gadd, which recognized short-term rentals as hotels, as commercial activities, not as residential purposes. But the changing landscape has also impacted other communities. Louisville proposed a moratorium, but even outside of Louisville, if you go to their website today, they name Anchorage, Douglas Hills, Graymore, Devondale, Hurstbourne, Indian Hills, Jeffersontown, Prospect, Shively, St. Regis Park is just a number of ones that do not permit short-term rentals at all. Some of the reasons is that those communities, we just aren't giving any protection. So if not this change, we don't have anything to safeguard against companies coming in and buying up those houses. And it does change the neighborhood. The company that bought the house in ours paid cash over asking. And so you run out families that would otherwise buy the property. And I understand that members of the person in charge of tourism and some people that want these non-owner occupied rentals want to drive business and tourism in Oldham County and LaGrange, and I do understand that, but I think these changes still allow that because they still allow non-owner occupied rentals in certain areas, and they still allow owner occupied conditional use. So I think it does a good job of drawing these bright line rules that still protect our communities, and I think it just simply reflects Supreme Court precedent, but I also think it reflects our comprehensive plan, which I know I spoke to before, but our comprehensive plan states that we're supposed to support and encourage the cultural heritage of the community, which is agricultural use, and this does that by protecting AG zones. We're meant to utilize a development review process to ensure future land uses are compatible with surrounding land uses, and again, this does that by acknowledging that commercial use and hotel use is not compatible with residences. Comprehensive Plan LU2 is to encourage the preservation of housing and establish neighborhood development that, quote, addresses issues of neighborhood identity, which is what a lot of people spoke to, how non-owner occupied use and out-of-town and out-of-state people can change a neighborhood's identity when they buy up enough houses. So in some, I just think that the changes, specifically subsection B, do a good job of recognizing the changing legal landscape of short-term rental properties and the fears and concerns of the community, including Clearview Acres. So we support the changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something to that. Mr. Stack mentioned cities in Metro that do not allow them. There's a city in Oldham County that doesn't, City of Pee Wee Valley, and the mayor's left, but they rescinded the regulations, the original regulations on short-term rentals, and now do not allow them except, again, in commercially zoned properties. So they do have two, but they're in commercially zoned property. So right here at home in Oldham County, there's a city that's part of the Joint Planning Commission that we will not be successful in getting them to adopt this because they have said they don't want short-term rentals.
Correct. And again, I think that was, they did this before these changes were made because I've gotten together with some heads of HOAs, including Pee Wee Valley, but also the head of Crystal Lake, which is represented here too. And we needed some protection, and I think this affords us that. So again, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Let's get your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, sir. My name is William Schmidt. I live at 1110 Riverside Drive on Prospect. I am the vice president of the Homeowners Association for that location, and I'm speaking both on behalf of that as well as on myself. I've participated with the study committee in developing these, and I want to first say I'm going to have
let's keep you near the mic so everyone can hear.
Yep. Is that better? Much. Okay. I have several comments and remarks I want to make, which don't exactly fit the pro. Okay, they're kind of questions, but I do want to first commend both the study committee as well as Mr. Urban and the staff for the work on this. This is absolutely what has been needed to turn the tide, cure the scourge of short-term rentals in residential areas. And by adopting this approach with the non-owner occupied, it remedies that situation on a go-forward basis. So fine business, good business, and I agree with both of the previous comments, the one about calling it deed restrictions in that section, and also the recommendation that, did I do something here?
Probably timed out, I would imagine.
Okay, and also the request that the homeowners associations give written approvals for those circumstances where that's required, which I guess would be owner occupied in a residential area. Okay. Now I'd like to make a couple of remarks. Mr. Combs raised very early on the very important question for us. In our particular location, I believe the figure you cited was 18 currently. Well, we have 5 of those on Riverside Drive.
Non-owner occupied.
Non-owner occupied on Riverside Drive. So we are a large, I'm standing here representing a large portion. Yes, sir.
We only had 4. I met with the, I guess, president of the homeowners association now, and Miss.
Well, but I think one of them on Riverside Drive is actually in Oldham Acres.
You're correct.
So there are 5.
You're correct. I am
one
including
of them
that.
is not in.
4 in Harmony Village.
4 in
and
Harmony
in-
Village and 1 in Oldham Acres.
Okay. That's good.
Yes, thank you for that
Yeah,
correction.
that's
Okay. So the real situation, I'll jump right to the core of this is, let me ask the question, why not revoke those conditional use permits? Why not? I've heard it said that we're not going to do that, but I'm asking the question. I've not heard the justification for why those are not going to be revoked. I recognize the plan is for them to be grandfathered, and they will have to meet the requirements when they reapply, if I understood the dialogue correctly. When they reapply for their annual renewal, they will have to meet all of these new requirements as far as the postings and that kind of stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah. If they can't meet the requirements, then they won't be renewed.
Okay.
But if they can meet those requirements, you can check me on this, but in my experience of 24 years in Oldham County, 17 actually, and multiple other jurisdictions, once government gives permission to do something, it is granted that they can move forward with that permission, and to remove that without compensating, we could be sued.
Okay.
So generally speaking, across the board, not just on short-term rentals, if we give a building permit to somebody and then decide we shouldn't have, and they've proceeded, we would have to pay damages if we revoked it, unless they were in violation. So that's, I think, the general reason why we say these are be grandfathered as a legal non-conforming use.
Yeah, I mean, there are conditions on all of those. I mean, if they don't comply, it can be revoked. But typically, conditional use permits run with the land unless they change by some design that they're in violation of a condition that has been set. Now, if under these new zoning proposals, I guess what is being asked is if we change it, well, no, once it's grandfathered, just because we may change the zoning class, we can't undo it unless they have.
It's
otherwise a taking.
Right. It's very similar to changing a setback. If we changed a setback, front yard setback from 35 feet to 40 feet, everybody that's got a 35 feet is granted that right. They don't have to come in and get variances, waivers, or whatever. So again, it's when government gives permission or permit, as long as they stay in compliance with that permit, it remains valid. And unless we compensate for that, which we're not going to do. So again, that becomes, the key word is legal non-conforming use. You can't expand a legal non-conforming use. So if somebody that had one already and they remained in compliance came and said, I want to make an addition on the building and add the number of guests we can have, they cannot expand that legal non-conforming use.
Okay. I understand.
And
Thank you.
another thing, if you have a conditional use for non-conforming use, or in this case, a short-term rental, and the owner sells the property to someone else who wants to use it as a short-term rental, they can do that. But they are bound by the same terms and conditions that are originally set by the board. But it passes on down if as long as they're in compliance.
I understand. Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. But now I'd like to drill down a little bit further just to clarify another point. Okay, you tell me again that terminology you just used.
Legal non-conforming use.
Okay. We as you know, Crystal Lake has changed their deed restrictions to prohibit, in effect, short-term commercial activities. Okay, and we are in the process of doing the same thing. We haven't completed that action yet. We hope to successfully get the majority of that's required to approve a change to the deed restrictions. And therefore, then, if I understand correctly, these 4 properties in Harmony Village will no longer be able to be renewed.
Well, I'm not sure of that. I'm not
Because
sure of that, because again, they were granted a permission under old set of either county regulations or your old deed restrictions. So I don't know that that is completely the case.
So we would have to take legal action probably to,
well, Bill, I'm sorry, this is not our place to discuss your legal action or not. We need to focus on these ordinances. I know you're trying to establish something, but for us to be questioned on a what comes next.
I'm only raising these for the purposes of understanding for all of the members here are being asked to vote on this change. That's the reason I am elucidating this and not asking for a determination.
Okay.
Okay, but have I made myself clear about what the question is? We have 4 properties that the Board of It.
She's looks like in disagreement with something you said.
Yes. I'm sorry. Although I'm not a board member, I'm on the road committee in Crystal Lake. And our deed restrictions always had no commercial. In other words, no hairdressers, no raising dogs, nothing. So we didn't change that in our deed restrictions. And I just want everybody to understand that.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. But again, the purpose is so that you understand that, we have a situation where, we have four properties that have been purchased and put into short-term rental, and have the result of that has been a number of complaints in the community. I don't know that they've all been formally filed, which I believe that process requires a nuisance complaint being filed to get action. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So so that's to come, but we are moving to change our deed restrictions because with the change that's being made here, which says that you can't violate any deed restrictions or homeowners association bylaws, which are both here in this statement, okay? And our bylaws, our new bylaws will also prohibit commercial uses as well. So we will both being into the deed restrictions and in the homeowners association bylaws. But if I understood your explanation, Jim, of, I'm sorry, I can't hold the terminology.
Legal non-conforming use.
Yes, non-conforming use. Those properties will become legal
non-conforming and will potentially remain in existence if they don't change any conditions, but they also can't be expanded. in any way.
If you
That's
want
the
to
point.
remain after the meeting, I'll discuss what's taking place with you out in the hall out there.
I would appreciate that, yes.
Yeah.
I'm aware of the meetings that you've had
I
with.
understand.
Bill, we really need to focus on our
Okay.
ordinance.
All right,
Okay,
I will conclude by saying I am I and our association are in full agreement with the recommendations that's being proposed here and recommend that you all approve them. Thank you.
Thank you. We got room for you. Come on up. We'll need to get your name and address for the record, and we'll need to get you sworn in.
Okay. Pam Ratterman, 2612 Belknap Beach Road, Prospect, Kentucky. I swear.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have a small beach adjacent, well, near Bill's. There are approximately 60 houses, most of them full-time occupied, but we have 4 Airbnbs or short-term rentals, one of them by an out-of-town company. My question is density. How close can they be together? Because several of them are getting closer together, and with 60 houses, that's an impact.
Yeah,
Are
we
you
aren't
considering that?
proposing anything in the regulations about the separation either by foot or how many per household or whatever. So we're not proposing anything.
You're not?
Correct.
Okay, so this company from Chicago I'm in fear that the next house that goes up for sale, they're going to be buying them.
Well, again, we're not going to allow non-owner occupied. So a company from Chicago won't be allowed to come in and buy a property and use it for a short-term rental.
Okay, this
under
one is, and I don't think they have a permit, so,
Well, that's a separate issue, and if you give us an address, we'll do code enforcement.
got it. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. I also have a question. We'll need you at the podium, please. And we'll collect your name and address and get you sworn regardless.
My name is Nancy Martin. I live at 2706 Belknap Beach Road. I promise, I swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, whatever. If the commission is uncomfortable with looking the other way for Derby and the PGA, why could you not require a permit for fewer than 1 or 2 short-term rentals a year? I'm usually not too comfortable looking the other way, but that could be a simple solution to what really nobody thinks is a problem.
Ma'am, can I ask you I'm not sure I understood, stay here. I'm not sure I understood so the relation to the Derby or PGA, are you suggesting that we allow 1 or 2?
I believe that Ms. Davis brought that up, and that I don't remember which one of you said, we all know that, but that's not what we're...
Well, the intensity of those for those events is too great. I mean, people are doing it and have been doing it historically, and we aren't just trying to turn a blind eye. I answered
require a permit for short-term rentals if you do it more than once or twice a year.
Well, that's what we are, yes. That's what this regulation is. If you're going to do it more than those 2 events, you are required to have a permit.
I guess I didn't see that was explicitly
I even said in response to the Derby and PGA that they should be permitted as a short-term rental. They
but
should be.
we're not going to.
Well,
is what I
some of them do. There are
Pardon me?
some that do. There are some that do get permitted, and all they say is we're only going to do it for Derby. So they're doing it the right way. But to go and find and catch and enforce all of them that are doing it is beyond the scope of the staff that we have to be able to do it for Derby
so
especially.
am I not making myself clear?
I'm not sure.
I understand her. I think what she's saying is that the way it's written now for as far as non-owner occupied, even if somebody wanted to rent it for a week for PGA or a week for the Derby,
Then you're not following the rules.
they're not following the rules. In
If you
these-
made the rule,
so what
so
she's
that
saying
you
is,
didn't
is
have
that
to for just those.
is there an exception that should be written in here that says even for non-owner occupied, they're allowed to do it for these certain events, and you can
Well,
name those events.
I don't,
or
my-
the number of times a year you
My,
whatever.
well, my answer is still the same. They should be permitted. Everybody that's going to do it, even if it's just for Derby, and even if it's only for one night, they should be permitted. I'm going to stand on that. We aren't going to make an exception. The problem becomes that so many people are doing it, we don't have any ability to enforce it. There's too many. We don't know where they are. We don't know how it's happening. So they all should be permitted. There's no exception. I would not want to write an exception in here because somebody will come in and say, well, I want an exception for this and that. My answer is no, no exceptions. We just can't keep up with the enforcement for these special events.
So if a neighbor complains, then they're not in compliance.
And they don't have a permit, then we can try
an
to do
enforcement.
code enforcement. But if it's only for a week,
Okay.
you know, we're going to be stuck with, okay, it only happened for a week, we won't do it again, and we've spent a lot of time doing code enforcement. So I'm really not turning a blind eye. I'm not suggesting we do. I'm saying it's impossible for us to catch everybody. We have one code enforcement officer, and quite honestly, he works on the weekend when he really shouldn't. We don't work weekends. We don't go out at night looking for these. We don't want to create an exception. But the people, to have a level playing field for anybody and everybody that wants to do short-term rental, they are required to get a permit. That's the level playing field, no exception.
And Mr. Urban, if they were cited at that point in time, it could be code enforcement, cited by the police. They're still open to all that.
Well, it could be, sure, if
Sure.
it became
If there's a
problematic.
problem, if this becomes a problem, they're still subject to all of those.
Yes.
Correct. Bobby?
We're complaint driven, and that's
Yeah, well, mostly, but our current code enforcement officer also is going out, and we're doing, not related to short-term rentals necessarily, but if he discovers something, he's not enforcing it because there's nobody complaining about it. So we've done what we call corridors. We've taken a couple of roads, and we've said, we're going to go down the street, and everybody that's not in compliance, either for nuisances or junk in their yard or whatever, and he's talked to all of them. So we're getting, yes, it is complaint driven in certain cases, because we can't see everything, but where we do see things, we are taking the initiative to do it. So we have seen an advertising that came actually through, I think, tourism, that was not permitted. Nobody complained. Tourism just said, hey, did you know? And we went out and told them they can't do it. We've had, you know, complaints from the city of Goshen as an example on one. We went out and enforced it. Any place that we can see it, we're going to enforce it. We don't ignore it. But again, keep going back to Derby and PGA because there's just too many of them.
Ms. Jones?
Okay, but you said even for Derby and PGA, they need a permit, but they wouldn't be allowed to get a permit if they're in a residential area anyways.
Well, no, if it's owner occupied. The bulk of the houses at PGA are not owned by corporations outside. The non-owner occupied would not.
So they could still get a permit.
It's the
just for
people
that
who
one.
say, I can make some money during Derby, I'm going to go on vacation and use the money I get from renting my house. The bulk of them are owner occupied, and they could
they
get
can
a
get a permit.
conditional use permit, and they could rent it legally.
That's what I was really speaking of people who take their homes and rent them out. They're owner occupied, and like you said, they take that money and go on vacation or whatever they do. They typically would not rent them to somebody that's going to go in there and tear them up and things because they're going to come back and live in the home. So they would be looking to like corporations that want a home for the the weekend and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of rentals I'm talking about. Now, will they be permitted or not? Is another issue.
Got it.
All right. I've tried to contain myself to not stand up. But so last year at Derby, we do get calls, and Jim mentioned one. Tourism called and said, hey, do you all know about this Airbnb? What it was is at Derby time, what we find a lot of is companies, corporations, nonprofits, they'll do raffles. So there's a lot of jockey foundations in this area that support injured jockeys. They will raffle off a home for a Derby stay as a short-term rental as a fundraiser. And so last year, what happened on a lot of these cases when I would get calls for short-term rentals, and maybe even let's use the owner-occupied as an example, is the owner-occupied, current regulation is an owner-occupied, they can come in and get a permit, and if I'm not doing anything else that day, they can walk out that day with one. With the new regulation, the owner-occupied will have to go through a conditional use permit. A lot of these Derby things that we find, and I haven't lived through PGA yet, but come back in a couple months and you can ask me, is we get these complaints the week of, the week before, and if we go and tell them we start code enforcement and say, hey, you need to come in and get a permit, the hearing will be long after Derby's over. And so a lot of these things on these one-time activities, it's very hard to enforce because we don't have the staff like Jim said, but in addition to, we're going to say, hey, you need to go through a hearing, and the hearing is going to be after they've already rented this thing out or before that hearing even occurs. So they're going to almost bog down the system of going before a board to ask for permission to something that's already been done. So it's an enforcement nightmare from that, but in addition to, a lot of these are companies that are doing nonprofit raffles, and we just don't, the one last year I emailed and said, hey, you realize you've got to have a permit for this? Oh yeah, we'll come in to get one. And that was on Oaks Day is when I got that complaint. So guess what? They never came back in. And what am I supposed to do then, or code enforcement supposed to do from that aspect? So that's what makes it difficult. Very similar to kind of the question that came earlier of a builder who's going to rent something out. By the time we get noticed of that, the person's already in their home. And the hearing for the Board of Adjustments is you've got to apply the third week of the month, and you're on the agenda for the third Thursday of the following month. It's over. So you're going to ask me a question.
I am. And it's going back to what Mr. Klingerfoot said. It seems to be complaint driven, which I understand because that's the nature of my background. But at the same time, it's not proactive. And if we're trying to make sure that everyone is in compliance, even if you have a special event like golf tournaments or the Derby or whatever the event is, I know we have county ordinances that are set up that says, if you have a special event, you come in, you get a permit, you're allowed to do this particular thing, if it's allowed in that ordinance to do it. A party, whatever it may be, or fireworks, it's a special event and special permitted. But what we're entertaining here is that basically if it's a one-time event, we kind of shy away and say, well, it's after the fact. But if somebody did want to comply and say, Derby's coming up in May, and I'm going to plan and I'm going to do and get a short-term permit, how does someone come in, and if they're going to abide by the conditions, going to get a commercial insurance policy for a one-time event? Will you,
When we did the original short-term rental several years ago, we talked to insurance agents. There are policies. All you have to do is essentially call them and tell them what you're doing, and they say, go ahead. It's kind of like if you buy a car and you just call your insurance company and say, I bought this car, I'm going to drive it home today. They go, okay. It actually is retroactive, 3 days, I believe. So these insurance policies are easy to get, according to the agents that we talk to.
Okay. And then you just give them a time period when that's going to occur?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Have we hashed that one out far enough? Okay. All right. Name and address, please.
I'm Sherry Jackson, and I live at 2640 Belknap Beach Road in Prospect. And I
Just
have...
one second.
Okay.
2608.
Oh, I need to be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And clarify that address for us, please.
2640
2640.
Belknap Beach Road.
Thank you.
I just have a follow-up question. I do Really appreciate and agree with everything I've seen and heard here today. Love it. But then Ms. Ratterman raised a question about the number of permits basically within a geographic area. So for instance, our neighborhood has about 60 homes. Has there been any discussion previously to, this would never happen probably, but what if 30 homes decided in our neighborhood to be short-term rentals? Would we be best to handle that through rewriting our HOA? Or, I mean, has there been any discussion about limiting maybe the percentage of homes within a neighborhood to be short-term rentals, or?
I don't remember that we had any discussion about either separation by X amount of feet or number in an area or residential. But I can say that the best way of neighborhood to deal with it is to make sure that your deed restrictions say no commercial activity.
Okay.
That's the number one thing.
Right.
That would limit any further short-term rentals.
Okay, for the commercial activity, but not for the owner, the owners
No,
themselves.
because it doesn't matter whether they're owner-occupied or not. They are considered commercial in nature. So
Oh,
even the owner-occupied would not be able to be permitted because they would be in violation of your deed restrictions, CCRs, whatever
Okay.
mechanism.
I understood.
That's
Right.
the key. That's the key.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's the key.
Thank you.
Is,
Okay. What other ground do we need to cover on this? Done? All right, so where we are then is I will look for a motion to move these recommendations forward to the members of the planning unit for consideration.
Mr. Chairman, I move in regards to docket PZ 23018 zoning text amendment that we move forward to presenting this to Oldham County Fiscal Court, LaGrange City Court, Crestwood City Council, Pewee Valley City Council to consider repealing and replacing section 250-050, as I feel the staff has done an excellent job of recapping what the study review committee had discussed and addressing all the issues. And this protects and provides for public health, safety, general welfare of Oldham County, and it protects the character and social economic stability of Oldham County while encouraging orderly and beneficial development. And it protects and conserves the value of our land throughout Oldham County and the value of the buildings and improvements upon which the land's used currently.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh.
Mr.
Urban.
Two things for your consideration in that motion. The first is we heard in public comment to add on page 7, item number 3, the last bullet point, add the word deed restrictions because it's not clearly in there.
Agreed.
And then we heard comment about whether or not we should add that an HOA or condo association should be the one, if one exists, should be the one who writes the letter of compliance with the deed restrictions, CCRs, other mechanism.
Okay.
And Brian and Ryan, I didn't catch where that would go in here, but
We'll find a home for it.
so,
Okay.
those were the only, I mean, we had a lot of discussions about other things. I wrote down a number of things. I didn't hear, unless the commissioners have something else to add that I missed. Those were the two things that I think we were clear on could be added.
So do you wish to incorporate those modifications into your motion?
I would.
Okay.
Would that therefore open it to discussion? Okay.
Sure. If you get
Okay.
a second, then you can discuss.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Finney? Okay, so discussion. Any concerns?
In regards to adding the HOA and condo, that was discussed a little bit in SRC, whether it come from there, and would that require like a notarized signature? How would we word that to make it so that we know that it has passed in front of those proper boards?
I suppose notarized signature is always good, but, it should be on their letterhead, and most HOAs have some kind of letterhead, I guess. I don't, again, that would be if they exist. And
Shouldn't it be on a recorded? Because when they change the CCR or D restrictions, or the HOA does, they actually vote on it, they record it with the clerk's office.
Well,
So
that's
it
if
should
they
be a
change it, but what if it already exists?
Yeah.
So what if the HOA already has no commercial activity, like
I think they
Crystal
should just
Lake.
provide
Crystal Lake.
proof of that, along with their president or whoever they're.
Yeah, any time the commissioner or the legislative bodies approve a change in the ordinance, then it gets down to how do we enact that? We'll probably do that through an application process. We'll have an actual application that will list, this is what you need to provide us, and it needs to look this way.
Yeah, we just added on to the application, yep.
Agreed.
Okay. Any further discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Page 6, point number 12, with the parking. Can we modify that to say 2 1/2 times at the end of that? It just says 2 1/2.
Doing 1/2 right, yeah. 1-half. Or
Mr. Finney, that suits you?
2.5 is a good way of saying it too. But, yep, good catch.
Thank you.
See it, Brian?
Okay, the maker and the second have approved on that. Further discussion? If none, then we'll move into a roll call vote. This is a motion to forward these recommendations to the members of the planning unit for consideration.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Finney,
Yes.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss,
Yes.
Mr. Winters,
Yes.
Mr. Halfling,
Yes.
Ms. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Ms. Nasser,
Yes.
and Mr. Marsh.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Edgar. And motion has carried on a vote of 10-0. All right, Mr. Urban, anything else for the good of the cause?
All right, Mr. Halfling is so graciously asking for your all's approval today for a couple of trainings that he went to back in June of this year. He attended the Kentucky Bar Association's continuing legal education training session and is asking for your all's approval so that he can apply that to his required Oldham County training requirements that the state requires he obtain. So he attended 2 different sessions, June 14th and June 28th, on updates from the Capitol. If you all care to see the exciting topics he heard about, you can after the meeting, but ask that you all approve his 12 hours.
All right, do a voice vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Approved. Anything additional?
Mr. Urban, can you hear me? Is there any updates on training? Like, I know KIPTA used to put on training by Mr. Pike, and are they not doing that anymore, or the state?
That's a good question. When COVID happened, everything came to a screeching halt, and I haven't seen that they're sponsoring any new ones. They've had a lot of personnel turnover at KIPTA. They're finally back up on their feet with full staff. So I can ask them if they're going to have anything like that. But at this point, I don't know of any. They haven't told us.
Because that was pretty informative
Yeah.
as far as ethics, legal, all the updates, self-taught work.
And we talk about having here, because we have a lot of new members, and every time we get a new member, we do about an hour and a half of, I do with the new member of here's why we exist and what we're doing. But as a group, I think we could always refresh ourselves on making motions and adequate motions and making sure that we look at all the testimony and base our decision on the testimony. So we talked about doing that. We just haven't had a short meeting where I thought, well, we'll put something together. But we'll keep that on mind, and we'll just do it collectively, stay an extra hour or two or whatever it might be. And any subject matter that you all would want to know about, again, and refresh, we can do that.
I just think a lot of the legal, there's been a lot of Kentucky Supreme Court decisions about planning commission's decisions or hearing decisions, and I just think we should be informed of those.
Yeah.
To make a decisive decision, and also about cell towers, and also about ethics and whatever else that I believe that KRS 100 tells us we need to keep on.
Yeah, and I think I have the David Pike, training. I know I've got the slides. I know it's probably not him live, recorded, but we could go through those.
Okay.
Which the bulk of them are still factual. So if you wanted to do that, we could just kind of look at that and just.
Try to get some hours.
Sure, yep.
All right. Mr. Finney.
I'd just like to commend Ryan and Brian and Jim and the other staff on this work on this short-term rental property thing. That was a big job, and it came out with a really, really good.
Here. Well done.
Yeah, it was.
Applaud both of them,
Yeah,
yep, I agree.
It was a great job, guys.
Anybody that's on that study review committee, because
That was a lot of work. There was four tough meetings, and I know a lot of work even if, past that. So, good job, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Finney. Anything else? All right, guys, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.